Hi guys, this is Hirosaki. This story is all about what if Naruto was in Overlord. What if Naruto lived in 22nd century Japan? What if he was the guildmaster of Ainz Ooal Gown? What if another guild with an axe to grind also appeared around the same time? Before we start, kindly like and subscribe to this channel and look over the description box for the author of this amazing storyline. Welcome aboard! Chapter 1, Something Wrong. A man covered in full plate armor stood above a young woman and her little sister, sword arm raised high. His blade gleamed in the sunlight, poised to end both of their lives in one swift blow. The young woman felt her eyes burn with tears and bit her lip. Hugging her little sister closer, both girls squeezed their eyes shut, bracing for impact. They didn't ask for this. Their little shire was not but a humble collection of farms and workshops. They didn't even have an inn, let alone something of value. Why would anyone go so far out of their way to attack them? If only she'd been stronger, if only they had a way to repel these invaders, but she wasn't, and they didn't. As if just to make matters worse, the man brought a friend with him. Even if she was able to overpower one by some miracle, she'd still be cut down, and with the gash in her back, she and her sister had nowhere to run. Thus, all she could do was sit here and die. Seconds, moments, what felt like minutes passed, and for some reason, she wasn't dead yet. Surely the man had had more than enough time to finish her off by now, and why did she hear the rattling of metal? The young woman hesitantly gingerly looked up to see that the man and his comrade were trembling, swords now held in a defensive stance behind their shields, backing away from them. Following their gaze, the young woman saw only despair. That was all she could describe this thing as. What they gazed upon was an unholy darkness which had torn a hole within reality itself, paper thin, and yet unfathomably deep. The swirling darkness took on the form of a half-oval, protruding from the earth as if it had been spat out by the pits of hell. They had no idea what it was, but merely gazing upon it filled them with an instinctive dread. Then, something stepped through it, as if emerging from a shadowy hallway. His glowing crimson irises were the first thing they saw, his pupils slit like some kind of beast. He was humanoid, or appeared to be, but even when all they could see was his face, they knew that there was something off about him. He stepped forth and 9 fox-like tails fanned out behind him. His hair and fur were a deep, blood red, his garb was alien to them, but bore a sense of prestige, like the garments of a foreign lord from a faraway land. 2 vulpine ears rested atop his head, long, crimson locks with black tips spilled out upon his shoulders, his blackened lips curled back in a hungry snarl to bare his fangs, and claw-like nails tipped his fingers. In one hand, he held a magic, golden staff of some kind, one that inspired both dread and awe, in equal measure a divine weapon seemingly forged by the gods of hell themselves. In the other, he held a black sword, seemingly made of shadow. Like the staff, it seemed both divine and unholy, yet not as powerful. But even that felt like comparing a basilisk to a fucking dragon. Neither beast nor man, this being made them all tremble before him, something deep, something primal within the woman and her would-be assailants told them that he was dangerous. The young woman clutched her sister close as he approached, but the being ignored her. She felt overwhelmed, like his presence alone was choking her to death. But as soon as that sensation came, it went and she could breathe again. Rah! The same, however, could not be said for the soldiers. There was a panicked cry as one of them lunged at him, and then, nothing. The woman dared to look and immediately regretted it. All that remained of the men was a pair of red stains upon the ground, their mangled armor now completely unrecognizable. She knew not how he did it, nor did she want to, and then, he turned his attention to her and. In the year 2138 AD, there existed a new frontier of gaming, the DMMRPG. That acronym stood for Dive Massively Multiplayer Online Role-Playing Game. Such video games were played through connecting their consoles directly to one's brain through the intracerebral nanocomputer network, a fusion of man and machine which had long since become commonplace in the world by now. Through this method, these games allowed players to enter a virtual world and experience it as though it were real life, to an extent. They had their limits like any other technology, but compared to the consoles of old, and now dethroned PC master race, these shortcomings were laughably paltry. It was quite the healthy industry, too, despite the SAO debacle of last century. Time heals all wounds, as they say, especially when people eventually catch up to the technology thereof. And among the abundance of DMMORPGs was one by the name of Yggdrasil. 1. The game in question had been painstakingly developed and released in the year 2126. Its major selling point was player freedom. There were over 2,000 basic and advanced job classes and 700 racial classes in addition to that. The highest maximum any one class had was 15 levels and with a level cap, so in order to attain the level cap of 100, one needed to take on at least 7 classes. On one hand, a player could feasibly take one level in each of 100 classes if they so choose, assuming they met the requirements, of course. But on the other, anyone who wanted to take on a specific class fantasy could do so as well, thanks to the abundance of similar and synergistic classes at their disposal. Also, various creation tools, some sold separately, could be used to customize one's characters to an unprecedented level. Weapons, armor, other cosmetic settings, and even flavor text were all fair game. In addition to all of that, Yggdrasil boasted no less than 9 whole worlds for players to explore: Asgard, Alfheim, Vanaheim, Nidavellir, Midgard, Jotunheim, Nibelheim, Helheim, and Muspelheim. These features combined to ignite the creative spirits of its Japanese players, sparking what could only be described as an artistic revolution. The game became so popular that Yggdrasil became a household name. But now, that was all in the past. A gigantic round table, carved from a single, solid chunk of black marble, sat in the center of a large chamber, surrounded by 41 luxurious chairs. But most of those seats were now empty. Once upon a time, every single spot had been claimed, but now, only 3 were filled. One of the seated beings was garbed in magnificent wizard's robes of black, violet, and gold. The high collar and exaggerated spalders seemed excessive, but they somehow fit with the rest of his attire. The exposed head, however, was a bare skull. Red pinpoints of light glowed in its otherwise empty sockets, a halo of black radiance filling out the rest. This was the Overlord, Mamanga, a magic caster of the highest rank who became undead to learn the most potent of spells. Another being in the room was what looked like a living mass of tar. Its liquid form writhed and churned constantly, never retaining the same form for more than a second. This one's name was Hirohiro, an elder black ooze, the most corrosive of all slimes. Finally, the last among them was the most humanoid in appearance, but in truth, he was farther from being human than even the walking mass of goop. He was garbed in regal, eastern robes of black, white, and orange, lightly armored and sporting a metal-plated headband with curved, decorative, ox-like horns. He had crimson eyes with slit pupils, blood-red hair that faded to black at the ends, and whisker-like markings on either cheek, matching the birthmarks he had IRL. Vulpine ears sat atop his head and he sported 9 fox-like tails. The fur on each was as red as his hair and the tips similarly faded to black. This beastman was Kurama, and he was a Yuko, a species of fox demon most well known for their talents in trickery, illusions, and fire magic. Despite their outward appearance, however, these creatures were actually players. In Yggdrasil, players could choose their races from 3 broad groups: humanoid, demi-human, and heteromorph. Humanoids were the most basic player type, encompassing humans, dwarves, elves, and the like. Demi-humans were generally uglier but with better physical stats, which included goblins, ogres, and actual beastmen like centaurs, satyrs, and leonine among others. Finally, there were the heteromorphic races, were generally more powerful all around, but came with massive drawbacks, not the least of which being that one needed to sacrifice at least 1 level in order to play a heteromorph, a level that could very well be more useful elsewhere if you don't know what you're doing. Granted, demi-humans had the same drawback, but they were also allowed far more freedoms and came with less drawbacks overall. Naturally, all 3 of these players were heteromorphs. As Mamanga spoke, his jaws did not move. Even the most advanced game of its time, one that literally plugged itself into the player's brain, still couldn't quite yet fully replicate speech and emotions in its player models. It was quite the hurdle to overcome, but several developers were undoubtedly taking a respectable crack at it. "It's been some time, Harahiro-san," he said. "I didn't expect you to come." Same here, Kurama chimed in, his face also unmoving. A digital word bubble then appeared above his head with a smiley face in it. Another word bubble appeared above Harahiro's head, this one featuring a more sheepish grin. Indeed, it has, he sighed reminiscently. 2 years or so? But still, you couldn't pay me to miss out on seeing you two one last time. Then, he turned what could be passed for a head towards the Foxman. I love what you've done with the place, by the way. If only our friends could see this tune one last time. Now it was Kurama's turn to use the sheepish grin emote. I had a lot of help, he said, turning indicatively towards Momonga. Only when I had time off from my new job, the skeletal man replied with warm chuckle. 2? That only started a month ago, Kurama pointed out, leaning forward and over the table. Has it now? Momonga chuckled again. It feels like it's been ages. Kurama was right, though. Before then, the two of them were quite the dynamic duo when it came to maintaining their guild base. Can't say I blame ya, senpai, Kurama said with a hearty chuckle of his own. My work's been pretty hellish too, with the new guy being a constant thorn in my ass, but it can't be helped. Preaching to the choir, Kurama-san, Hirohiro told him, his voice laced with dry amusement. I'm starting to feel how I look in game. And from there, the three of them shared their respective horror stories of the workplace. They all laughed and bitched for literal hours on end. But, alas, they couldn't be here forever. This is the most fun I've had in a long time, Hirohiro said with a tired chortle. How long has it been since he was this happy? I wish I could stay longer, but I need to get up early. I hear ya, Kurama told him, a smiley face emoji above his head once more. Time really does fly when you're having fun. Take care, Harahiro-san. With that and one last chuckle, a black tendril lashed about as the elder Black Ooze opened up his interface. Maybe we can meet up IRL sometime, he said. Have a good night, you two. Then, he went still and vanished soon after in a burst of pixels. When it was just the two of them, a comfortable silence washed over Momonga and Kurama. In the end it was broken by the former. We should give the place one last tour, he suggested. For old time's sake. Definitely. Kurama beamed at the thought. 2 hours after they left, Momonga and Kurama were back in the meeting room, standing before a mighty staff floating within its little nook in the wall. Their guild hall, the Great Tomb of Nazarick, was once a 6-floor dungeon. But, after having claimed it as their own, it was now a 10-floor dungeon with 7 unique themes spread out between those very same levels. The first 3 floors, collectively known as the catacombs, were modeled after an actual tomb. The 4th floor was an underground lake, the 5th, a massive glacier, the 6th, a rainforest. The 7th was a molten hellscape, the 8th was a massive wasteland, and finally, the 9th and 10th floors were the realm of the gods, in other words, the home base of the guild Ainz Ooal Gown. One would think they were just tooting their own horn by calling it that, but at the same time, many a player would admit that they earned the bragging rights, as Ainz Ooal Gown ranked among the top 10 guilds in Yggdrasil with several world firsts under their collective belt, Nazarick only being the most obvious and countless top rankings in PvP. Currently, they were on the 8th floor, having taken this damn long to get back here, and it was starting to show for Momonga. It was quite weird and very out of character to see a skeleton stretch and yawn. The fact that his jaw didn't move only made it worse. Getting tired, senpai? Kurama asked. Yes, it would seem that I'm at my limit, Momonga sighed dejectedly. Sorry, I couldn't stay with you until the end. Kurama wanted to say something, but hesitated. It's fine, he said. You should get some sleep. The skeletal player nodded, but before he logged out, he wanted to say something. I cannot express how grateful I am that you stuck with us until the end, Naruto, he told Kurama, referring to him by his real name. Everyone in the guild knew it by now, and several of its former members still kept up with him on social media. Well, I am the guildmaster, the whisker-marked man replied. And you guys are the only family I've ever had. It was the least I could do. I wish I could do more for this family of ours, Momonga lamented, starting to wobble as he eyeballed the guild roster on his interface. Out of the 41 former members, only 6 still remained, everyone else had long since quit the game. So do I, Kurama added. We should definitely meet up sometime. I'm sure Perrin Roncino would love to see you again. Definitely. The Foxman let out a nostalgic chuckle at the thought. Oh, the conversations we had. Kurama didn't know why, but that damn pervert was so fun to talk to. Given the Yuko's usually low tolerance for people who act in such a way, it was quite weird that they got along, but they did. Quite well, in fact, and it was primarily because of Perrin Roncino that Naruto had his diverse game and manga collection IRL. Ahem. Not that he was willing to admit it, of course. Setting those thoughts aside, Kurama looked at Momonga once more. It's been fun, Satoru-senpai. That it has, the skeleton said. That it has. And with that, he logged out. Kurama sighed, the player behind the fox demon now left to his own devices. No one else had logged in tonight and the servers would shut down once and for all in only 30 minutes, so he wasn't confident that they'd show. Such a shame. Uzumaki Naruto was not exaggerating when he said that Ainz Ooal Gown was the only family he's ever had. Raised in an orphanage and having been an outcast since the day he was born, the young man never knew what it was like to have a family, to be accepted, to actually fit in, until he joined the guild Ainz Ooal Gown a few days before they changed their name. Eventually, he even became their guildmaster, as a reward for his diligence and dedication. Since then, Momonga was his right-hand man, teaching him all he needed to know while serving as a moderator. And now, with even him gone, Naruto realized how lonely it was. 3. I really am the only one left. Though 6 others were still registered as members, most of whom were part of Ainz Ooal Gown for longer than even him, they were not returning to this game. And even if they did, it was going to shut down. Damn it! Kurama slammed his fist against the nearby wall in frustration. The game registered it as an attack. The algorithm immediately started calculating his stats against the wall's damage resistances and a little 0 popped up above his fist. This is the great tomb of Nazarick. The home we built for ourselves after all those hours of blood, sweat and tears. How could you all abandon it like that? Kurama seethed and then sighed, taking a moment to calm down. No. I shouldn't be mad at them. He knew they didn't quit because they wanted to. Every last one of them, even Momonga, was simply forced to choose between real life and this collective power fantasy of theirs. Gazing upon the staff, a little sad smile emoji popped up above his head. 7 serpents twisted and twined around the body of the staff itself in a wicked, twisted shape, one of them curving outwards from the rest to form a knuckle bow. At one end, their heads formed a perfect circle, mouths agape in agony. Each one held within its maw a gemstone of a different color. The grip was of exquisite crystal and the body was of purest gold. This was no ordinary staff, but the staff of Ainz Ooal Gown, their literal guild weapon, unique to them. It was the literal symbol of their guild, providing its user with administrative powers over the great tomb of Nazarick and denizens thereof. It was also the biggest weakness of all guilds in Yggdrasil. If a guild weapon were ever to be destroyed, the guild would be disbanded, which was precisely why Kurama and the others kept theirs here, in this sealed-off chamber, unless and until they needed it. 4. Granted, he technically didn't need the staff right now, but it would feel weird if he never held such an important item in these last moments of the game. With that thought in mind, Kurama, the effective last member of Ainz Ooal Gown, reached out and grasped the weapon of his guild. I should probably get dressed for the occasion while I'm at it, he told himself. Then, Kurama opened up the player console and equipped himself with his top gear. In Yggdrasil, there were 9 ranks of gear. Low class, mid class, high class, and top class were initially the only ones, but when a few expansions came out, Legacy class, Relic class, Legendary class, and Divine class were added in that order. Technically Divine class was the strongest, since the highest tier, which was the strongest since the start of the game, world class, only included certain magic items, like the Throne of Kings, which had allowed them to claim a dungeon as their guild hall. Only 200 such items existed in the game and they were all unique. The Staff of Ainz Ooal Gown was a divine class item, thanks to the 1,500 combined hours they'd all collectively and painstakingly put into upgrading it. So, Naruto equipped his character with items of similar rank and grandeur. His robes, belt and leggings were swapped out first, replaced by a regal, black, white and burnt orange GI with a swirly fire motif, leggings in the form of black hakama, a white rope serving as his belt, and a tiger pelt, these items granting him with a massive buff to his agility, HP, and resistance. The headband he now wore was identical in form, but not function, to the prior one being a more powerful item with more substantial buffs to agility, MP, and magic attack. As a set, these four items, the chest pieces, headpiece, belt, and leggings, were known as the regalia of Shuten Doji. Of course, the headpiece was originally a horned demon mask and the attire was of a different color scheme, but Naruto had them changed with the in-game customization features. These changes were purely aesthetic, but they were more in line with his personal preferences. Meanwhile, his boots gave him another buff to agility and came in the form of matching greaves, tabi and zori. They also lowered the chances of movement-based debuffs and the like from affecting him. This included spells. Meanwhile, his gloves were Eastern-style gauntlets that granted agility and magic attack, his new pauldrons being part of the same item, and to go with all of that, he wore a medallion and 9 rings with various magic effects. Finally, upon his belt was his primary weapon, a one-handed sword named Wrath of Jigaku, which dealt fire and shadow damage while allowing him to use agility instead of his literally non-existent physical attack stat while it was equipped, even when he wasn't actually using it at the time. The sword also had some rather nasty on-hit effects for when he was using it, weakening the target's physical attack and physical defense, and even having a 10% chance to stun. To make matters worse, it would punish players who like to hoard things on their person by adding additional penalties to movement, agility, and physical attack based on how many they were carrying in their inventory at the time. Once everything was equipped to him, a circular, black, white, and orange symbol featuring a flaming skull formed beneath his feet to indicate that his aura of primal fear had been activated before disappearing. This buff was the one of 2 set bonuses he got from wearing the regalia of Shuten Doji in its entirety, the other being immunity to all poisons, save for alcohol. In fact, the effects of any and all alcoholic beverages he consumed in-game would last for twice as long. As for the aura itself, it was quite the nasty thing for a roguelike character to have, passively reducing accuracy and physical defense of enemies within melee range, while increasing his chance to stun those affected. Of course, it didn't work on heteromorphs or dragons, among other things, but still. 5. A smiley face emoji popped up above Kurama's head. Damn, it felt good to be back in this. And with that done, he left the chamber, disappearing in a poof of smoke. Shortly thereafter, on the 9th floor, the sound of his footsteps and tapping of his staff echoed throughout a massive, white chamber. The whole floor was like a palace made of alabaster, decorated with all manner of paintings, trophies, and sculptures. He saw a busty woman in the distance, around 5'6", with long, golden locks and vibrant, pink eyes. Naruto recognized her as one of the 41 maids created by Whitebrim. One of the perks to having a guildhall was that it allowed players to create their own NPCs, and after deciding that they needed servants to maintain the Great Tomb while they were farming and raiding and such, said member did so with a smile on his face. It was quite the fond memory, in fact. The usual limit was 700 levels distributed between the NPC, meaning you could have 7 level 100 NPCs, 700 level 1 NPCs, or anything in between. But, as was usually the case with anything, Ainz Ooal Gown went all out and did everything they reasonably could to increase that limitation, resulting in well over 3,000 levels between their countless NPCs. And with Whitebrim being a mangaka who had recently broken into the industry at the time, he was more than happy to use this function as a creative outlet. Spouting shit like maid uniforms are their secret weapons and maids are justice all the way. He meticulously designed each and every last one of those 41 maids with every ounce of love and care he could muster. Everyone in the guild had to admit that the end result was quite impressive. Ah, Whitebrim-san, Kurama muttered with a fond chuckle. You lovable goof. He didn't do all of the work, though. The maid's routines were all programmed by Hiro and 5 others, for example. But the bulk of it was certainly his doing. Smiling and nodding at the maid as she bowed to him, Kurama said, "Thank you for your work." The man behind the fox knew she would not respond as she wasn't programmed to do so, but he simply couldn't bring himself to ignore her. She was one of Whitebrim's babies, after all. Thanking her felt like the least he could do. With that done, Kurama carried on down the hall and turned towards a large pair of doors to his right. It was a rather basic misdirection. The hallway was designed to lead up to an elaborate doorway that looked far more important, but in truth, the teleportation circle in the chamber beyond only led to a maze of traps and monsters with no way out. Meanwhile, this doorway, while fairly large, looked far less important by comparison. All of the others before and after it, including the one across the hall, were identical and led to dozens of sleeping quarters. Some were made for guild members, but the rest were purely cosmetic, created to give Whitebrim's maids and various other servants of Nazarick a place to sleep. Of course, the NPCs never actually used them, but it's the thought that counts, and lacking them would drive the RPers in the guild insane. Past the doorway before Kurama, however, was a massive staircase, wide enough for 10 men, arms outstretched, to walk side by side without issue. The stairs appeared to be of white marble, partially covered by a luxurious, red carpet. He descended the stairs and entered the 10th and final floor, soon finding himself in a massive entrance chamber with 7 more NPCs. The first was a distinguished, old gentleman in a butler's uniform. His short, combed-back hair was pure white and he had a matching, neatly trimmed, full beard. Naruto immediately recognized him as Seabass, an NPC created by TouchMe, one of the founding members of Ainz Ooal Gown. Seeing the man now gave Naruto flashbacks of how he was saved by said player from a group of assholes who were camping him at the time. That was just before Naruto himself had joined the guild. The other 6 NPCs were all female, dressed as maids, but very different from the one before. Unlike the 41 maids created by Whitebrim, these girls were decked out in armor, each one sporting a different weapon. Of course, he was the one who suggested that they be dressed as maids, but that was where his influence on their designs ended. These girls were known as the Pleiades Battle Maids, Nazarick's last line of defense. Another smiley face emoji popped up above Kurama's head as he approached the NPCs. "Follow me," he said, heading to the other side of the entry chamber. The NPCs all did as commanded. As for the chamber itself, it was officially called the Lemegeton after an ancient tome that served as the Lesser Key of Solomon. It was Ulbert Alan Odell's idea, said Goofball being the biggest edgelord of their guild. "Since they made it all the way here, we should welcome them," he said when pitching his idea to the guild. "Let others slander us as they will, but we shall welcome them proudly and openly like the magnanimous lords we are." Ainz Ooal Gown took a vote and then they proceeded to do just that, and this chamber was quite the welcome indeed. It was a massive, dome-shaped hall. 4 colored lamps glittered from the ceiling above and 72 niches lined the sides of the room, each one containing a demonic statue. 6. The statues were golems made of extremely rare and valuable alloys, each one modeled after a demon described in the Lemegeton. The lamps, meanwhile, were a type of monster that spit out powerful elementals when an enemy player entered their aggro radius. If the lamps alone attacked as one, they could easily defeat 2 teams of 100 max-level players. Combined with the golems, this chamber served as one last fuck you to any invaders who dared to raid their base, giving any surviving guild members more time to prepare for their final stand. 7. As for the doors on the other end, they were nearly 20 feet tall. On one side, a beautiful goddess of Yggdrasil's lore was etched into it, on the other lay a demon lord who served as her nemesis. He opened the door and basked in the glory of Nazarick's throne room. The room itself was no less than 10 times the size of the Lemegeton, well over 600 feet in length with a vaulted ceiling and lined with dozens of red chandeliers. The mighty chamber appeared to be made entirely of black marble and obsidian. A mighty throne sat upon a pedestal, 10 steps high, at the other end. The magic throne appeared to be carved from a single piece of dark crystal, its back high enough to reach the ceiling, and hanging from it was a red banner proudly featuring the symbol of the guild. The center of the room was covered in a silver and gold carpet, leading up to the throne, and lining the walls on poles sunk into them, hung 41 flags of black and red. Each one bore the personal symbol of a guild member. As he approached the throne, Kurama's gaze was drawn to a woman beside it. She was an absolute beauty with skin of alabaster, long, raven hair, and vibrant, golden eyes with slit pupils. Though her gentle smile was that of a goddess, the white horns protruding crookedly from the sides of her head suggested that she was anything but. She wore a lovely, white shoulderless dress which showed off her hips, white gloves, and a golden spiderweb necklace that covered her shoulders and chest. From her waist sprouted 2 black feathered wings which she held at her hips like a skirt. The woman was Albedo, one of Tabula Smaragdina's most prized creations. Kurama took a seat on the throne and commanded Seabass and the Pleiades to bow before him. They all took a knee. Then, he turned to Albedo. Albedo. In truth, Naruto had never paid her much mind, which made him feel rather guilty now. Upon seeing that he had 5 more minutes to go before the servers shut down, though, he decided to change that. Using the staff to open up her interface, Naruto quickly read her bio. He let out a low whistle. Though he knew that Tabula had built her to be a tank, he would have never imagined that she'd be this potent. Credit where it's due, Kurama thought aloud. That's a hell of a build. Then, Naruto read her flavor text, mostly just for the shits and giggles. As it turned out, she was written to be a diligent worker and overseer of Nazarick, second only to the members of the guild in rank. It was interesting to read. But then, at the very end, he found a line that just seemed terribly out of place. She also happens to be a slut. Kurama flinched at that, though she was a succubus, the way it had been written was just such an abrupt shift in tone. Then again, a lot of the members were into Gapmo, even Tabula, so it came as no surprise that he'd add such a thing to her bio. Tabula, you weirdo, Kurama muttered with a warm chuckle. Then, feeling impish, he decided one last act of mischief was in order. He'd never abused his administrative powers before, despite how much he'd wanted to on countless occasions, but with the servers shutting down in less than 5 minutes, he decided that it was now or never. The hologram of a keyboard appeared before him at his command and Naruto deleted the words "a slut" from her flavor text before replacing them with something else. She also happens to be madly in love with Kurama. 8. With a chuckle, he dismissed the keyboard and sat back in his throne. I'll miss this, all of this. Kurama let out a satisfied, yet melancholy sigh as the last few seconds ticked away. The Severs will be shutting down, a disembodied, feminine voice declared. And then... Nothing changed. Uzumaki Naruto blinked in confusion as he found himself still sitting in that very same throne. What happened? Did the server fail to shut down? Huh, that was weird, he mused aloud, not noticing the NPC's reactions to his comment. The server shutting down should have forced me to log out. It was definitely past midnight, this had to be a system error, right? Albedo and Seabass looked at their lord oddly, having no earthly idea of what he was talking about, but remained silent for now. It wasn't their place to interrupt a supreme being in its thoughts. What happened? Naruto frowned in concern and confusion. With a deliberate wave of his hand, he pulled up his UI to see if there were any updates in the world chat, but it didn't appear. The interface was completely gone. Panicking slightly, he tried everything he could think of, forced logout, calling a GM, sending a message, but nothing worked, and his paranoia only grew with each and every failed attempt. And then... Is something wrong, milord? Naruto jumped slightly at the silky, feminine voice calling out to him. He looked at Albedo to see her fraught with concern. And all the young man could do was stare. Karn Village. Named after Karn the Explorer, this settlement was located on the border of the Riastei's Kingdom and Baharuth Empire, near the southern tip of the Azelarisha mountain range, just outside the Great Forest of Tab. Despite its name, the village was but a quaint, little shire with a population of 120, among 25 families. Time seemed to stand still for her people, the only visitors they ever got were tax collectors, save for the occasional specialist who wanted to buy some herbs every once in a blue moon. That said, they made their living off the land. If it's on the table, then someone in the household either killed it, grew it, or both. Given that no one in the village could use magic, the continual light spell found in most cities was a luxury they simply did not have, so those within rose with the sun and worked till dusk. And when Henri Amat woke up extra early, the first thing she did was collect some water from the nearby well. Upon reaching it, she rolled up her sleeves, revealing the untanned skin of her upper arms. The lighter tone stood out in stark contrast. One could also see a hint of muscle on her, as 16 years of farm life ensured that she'd be anything but a frail maiden. Then, she heaved the filled buckets up with a yash and scurried back home to fill the water tank. It would take 3 trips for her to finish, but she didn't mind too much. If the buckets were bigger, I'd finish in 2 trips, she muttered to herself. But, these are the biggest ones we have, then again, would I even be able to lift them if they were bigger? She wasn't sure. Setting those thoughts aside, Henri carried on, humming a merry tune, but then, something gave her pause. Was that a scream? Then, the sound of wood splintering filled her ears and a sense of dread started to sink in. Dropping her buckets, the chore forgotten, she bolted towards her family's hut. She nearly tripped over her long skirt in her panic, but managed to stumble back into a full sprint. Another scream filled the air, this one coming from the direction of her home, and the dread only filled her more. The din of battle rang across Karn village as men in armor bearing the sigil of the Baharuth Empire burned and pillaged with sadistic glee. Henri yelped as a dead man fell at her feet from a stab to the chest. Her eyes burned at the sight. "Am Mr. Morga," she whispered, fleeing as the man's killer entered his house. There were no strangers in a village this small. Mr. Morga had done nothing in his life to deserve such a gruesome fate. With a sob, Henri kept running until she reached her own house. "Mom! Dad! Ninu!" In her panic, the young woman slammed the door open as she called out for her family. "Oh, thank the gods!" Henri's mother sighed with relief, embracing her eldest daughter. Ninu, meanwhile, ran up to her big sister bawling her eyes out. Then, their father spoke up, urging them to turn towards the door so they could run. "We need to get shit." But, before they had a chance, a man in armor blocked their way, sword drawn. Without a second thought, Henri's father Bull rushed the man in question, tackling him out of their way before turning to his wife and kids. "Hurry up and run." Alas, that was all he could do as the soldier drove his sword through the man's back. But, he'd bought them just enough time to leave the house. His wife didn't last long, either, as she too was cut down. Their eldest, however, barely managed to evade getting her head impaled by another man's spear. By sheer luck, the weapon got stuck in a nearby wagon and she was not about to let this opening go to waste. Grasping her little sister's wrist with tears streaming down her cheeks, Henri turned around and bolted with all her might, 2 more soldiers hot on her heels. That look in Albedo's eyes, the sheer concern she conveyed. Naruto had spent so much time in this game world that he'd almost forgotten how expressive real people could be. It was just so jarring to see such a look on the face of an NPC that his brain needed a moment to reboot. Yup. Something was definitely wrong. "Sorry," Naruto said reflexively, offering the succubus a sheepish chuckle. "I didn't mean to worry you." It felt weird talking to her like this, but it was refreshing. But, unfortunately, his response had only worried the woman even more. Are you all right, me lord?" Albedo asked, her face drawing closer to examine him, the scent of her perfume knocking Naruto out of his stupor. That's not right at all, he thought. In Yggdrasil, there was no stimulation to the player's sense of smell, so this scent shouldn't exist. Naruto hesitated, feeling a bit weird, but replied to her, nonetheless. I'm fine, he answered, thank you. He wasn't the type to talk to dolls like this, but the genuinely human concern she seemed to express had caused Naruto to do so out of pure instinct. Her body language, her speech patterns, the way she carried herself, this was not how the AI of Yggdrasil acted. Or any AI for that matter. It was too sophisticated, too human. But, just as the panic started to sink in, the words of a guildmate rang in his mind and did absolute wonders in calming his tits. Panic is the seed of defeat, remain calm and think logically. Look beyond your surroundings and don't waste your effort on unnecessary details. Naruto silently thanked Panito Mo, Ainz Ooal Gown's resident philosopher, and took a deep, calming breath. You look troubled, me lord, Albedo pointed out, her frown only deepening. Please forgive me, but are you sure you're alright? Naruto couldn't help but be entranced by her beautiful, limpid eyes. Though there was this cute, shy girl back in high school who seemed to like him, nothing ever came of that relationship because they were both too damn shy, and that was the closest Naruto had ever gotten to anything even remotely resembling a romantic relationship IRL, though it was certainly not for lack of trying on his part. As was the case for many a high schooler, he had several crushes that never went anywhere. That being said, Naruto was way out of his element right now. He was not at all used to a woman approaching him like this, showing such genuine concern. He could feel his cheeks burn and his heart throb, he simply couldn't help but answer her truthfully, his mouth acting on its own. I can't get in contact with a GM. Albedo stared at him in confusion before her eyes filled with such helplessness. The poor thing looked like a kicked puppy. He felt so guilty seeing her like that. Please forgive me, Lord Kurama, she lamented. I have no idea what this GM is. But rest assured that I will do anything and everything in my power to help. Yup, they were actually having a real conversation. Such a thing should be impossible, but they were. The closest thing an NPC should be capable of to something like this was a macroed response to being addressed in a certain way. There were certain emotes and the like one could download for scripting certain roleplay events, but no one could ever hope to achieve something this sophisticated. It's fine, Naruto insisted. Really, it's fine. This is not your fault in the slightest. Taking a moment to collect his thoughts, he composed himself. Something is definitely wrong, though. Well, if nothing else, he should see if the others reacted similarly or if this was limited to Albedo. Upon looking over the butler and maids, however, Naruto could tell that they weren't acting normally either. Clearly, the first thing he needed to do was figure out what the hell was going on. With that realization in mind, Naruto took action. Seabass, he barked. Yes, me lord? The butler perked up, answering without hesitation. I want you to meet up with Sheltier and scout the area around Nazarick, Naruto ordered. If you encounter any hostiles, flee on sight until further notice and let me know immediately. As the butler bowed and took his leave to do just that, Naruto found himself having even more questions. Like all of the others, the butler in question was made to protect their base, so ordering him to leave should have been impossible. Thus, Naruto continued from there by addressing the others. Pleiades. The six maids perked up and responded identically to Seabass in perfect unison. Split up into pairs and make sure everything is as it should be in Nazarick. If you find anything even slightly out of place, let me know immediately. If you find any intruders, flee on sight and let me know. As Seabass had before them, the six maids bowed and took their leave. Before he could address her, however, Albedo beat him to it, looking concerned. Shall I summon the floor guardians? Not yet, Naruto told her, taking command of the situation. Send them a message to be on high alert and let Sheltier know that Seabass is on his way to meet her. I already have, me lord, the succubus replied with a bow. I assume that they are to flee if they spot any intruders as well? For now, yes, he confirmed with a nod. The safety of Nazarick and her people are my first priority. As it always has been, she commented approvingly, a warm smile spreading across her face. Is there anything else you wish for me to do, milord? Naruto frowned thoughtfully and nodded. Come here, he said. Naruto simply couldn't help himself, she looked so real that he had to confirm what his eyes were seeing. She looked surprised at first, but drew closer without a word, an enthusiastic grin quickly gracing her features as she did. Once again, he could smell her perfume. It was so sweet and pleasant. Naruto took hold of her hands at first. They were warm and soft. The silky feel was so much more real than it should be. Moving up to her wrists, he could actually feel her pulse. Was she actually real? There was only one way to find out. Yggdrasil was a tier-rated game, thus, our 18 acts were strictly forbidden, not just by the company, but by law, as per the Social Order Maintenance Act. What he was planning to do felt incredibly dirty, but still. I gotta do this at all costs. Naruto thought. He was panicking because he got stuck in the game with no way out. He was just trying to force his way out. That would hold up in court, right? But what if she actually was real? Ludicrous as that notion sounded, it legitimately seemed like a possibility, now. And if that was the case, would this be sexual harassment? Again, there was only one way to find out. Albedo, he said awkwardly. Can I touch your breasts? You blew it, you noob. 9. There was a long, awkward silence as Naruto inwardly panicked, half expecting her to yell baka. And punch his lights out like a badly written tsundere. But then. A look of pure euphoria washed over Albedo as she gave her answer. Of course, Lord Kurama. Please, help yourself. She gleefully straightened up and presented her ample bosom to him the instant she realized what he'd actually said. She'd never expected him to be so forward. But still, she was not about to look a gift horse in the mouth, and his awkwardness was just so cute. As the large, healthy breasts bounced enticingly before his eyes, Naruto could feel something stirring in his loins. For what felt like an eternity, he could only stare, salivating at the sight and smell. Then, he reached up and gave them a firm squeeze. He hesitated for a moment upon hearing Albedo's deep, hungry moan and continued. Yup, this all but confirmed it. There was no way he should be capable of doing this. In Yggdrasil, there were multiple safeguards preventing players from doing this kind of thing, even to NPCs. Anyone who tried would be banned outright, kicked off the server, and potentially arrested for disturbing the peace, public indecency, and disorderly conduct. Also, trapping him in a game and making them unable to log out was highly illegal, qualifying as a form of kidnapping, no less. But there was no way he could still be in a game, even the VR eroges he'd played were not this convincing. 10. They felt so real. There was no doubt about it, anymore, laughably outlandish as it may seem, this game was no longer just a Gaia. Albedo's orgasmic wail brought his train of thought to a crashing halt, her knees buckling as she collapsed on top of him, and when she did, Naruto realized that her breasts had been freed at some point, his thumbs on her nipples. He immediately removed his hands out of sheer panic, having not realized that he'd taken it that far. The poor woman gasped for air and trembled like a leaf. Her cheeks were stained a bright red, her nipples hard, and eyes glazed over. I am so sorry. Naruto squeaked. Whatever he was about to say died on his tongue as she gave him a ravenous, desperate look. Am I to have my first time right here and now, me lord? See, come again? As many times as you wish. Albedo licked her chops hungrily. How shall I dispose of my clothes? Do you wish for me to do it slowly, or shall we be skipping to the main event as soon as possible? Wah! The fire in her eyes made him feel like a lamb before a starving lioness. Or would it be better if you unwrapped me yourself? Her rump swayed enticingly behind her as she giggled lewdly, her wings fluttered cutely and she batted her eyelashes at him with such desire that Naruto almost lost control of himself right then and there. Whoa, 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 whoa. He raised his hands up defensively. And now's not the time for that. She flinched as if struck upon hearing that. My apologies, Lord Kara. And no. No, it's fine. Naruto floundered a bit in his haste to fix the situation. It's entirely my own fault for losing control like that. You have nothing to apologize for. Wow. Albedo blinked owlishly at him and then turned beet red. To think she had such an effect on the man she loved, despite his caliber, no less. It did wonders for her ego, but damn did she feel sheepish. Alright, she sputtered awkwardly, making herself presentable once more. I insist that the fault is partially mine, though. I lost control as well. 11. It's fine, Naruto sighed. Really, it is. I'm the one who started it, anyway. Oh, how she wanted to hug him so badly, or give him a peck on the cheek, anything to show her appreciation, really. It took every ounce of self-control she had to resist, but Albedo knew that doing such a thing would only make this even more awkward. If you say so, milord. What have I done? Naruto inwardly lamented. That was just supposed to be a bit of harmless mischief. Oh, Tabula would be pious. For Albedo to act this way, it must have been because he'd changed her flavor text. Shit. 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 I've defiled your baby, I'm so sorry. The succubus in question then cleared her throat and composed herself as best she could before changing the subject. Oriole has yet to report anything amiss, she pointed out. Grateful that she pulled him away from his train of thought, Naruto replied. Same goes for the floor guardians. He hummed thoughtfully, dwelling upon the situation for a moment. Tell the guardians of each floor to meet me at the amphitheater in an hour if it turns out everything's okay. Of course, milord, Albedo replied with a bow. Shall I be accompanying them? Yes, Naruto told her with a nod. Then, he gave another thoughtful hum. On second thought, let Gargantua go back to sleep when he's done scanning his floor. That's all I'm gonna need him for at the moment. As you wish. Naruto sighed and decided that he needed some time to himself. Rising from the throne, he stretched his legs and turned to Albedo. I'll be in my bedchamber if anyone needs me. He hoped nobody would. The Yuko needed some alone time to process this series of events. Kurama, Uzumaki Naruto, 12. The Ultimate Trickster. Racial Classes. Kitsune, 10. Yuko, 10. Oni, 10. Demonic Sorcerer, 5. Job Classes. Ninja, 15. Rogue, 10. Beguiler, 10. Arcane Trickster, 10. Assassin, 10. Master Assassin, 5. Necromancer, 5. Total level. 100, 35 racial, 65 job. Character stats. HP, 90. MP, 100. Physical attack, 0. Physical defense, 40. Agility, limit exceeded, estimated to be about 150. Magical attack, 100. Magical defense, 40. Resist, 80. Special, 100. Karma rating. -500, extreme evil. Chapter 2, Inner Struggles. Not 10 minutes after leaving the throne room, Naruto stood in his bedchamber, looking at a full-body mirror by the dresser and staring at his reflection. It was so weird to see his character's lips move while he was talking and to hear a voice that was not his own when he did. 1. But, this was, apparently him, now. He could move his ears, he could move his tails, and yes, they were indeed his. Each and every last one of those tails were now his limbs, every bit as much as his arms and legs, they were indeed his limbs. How he had the muscle memory to move them was beyond his understanding, but move them he did. Similarly, it would seem his ears also helped convey emotion. Every time he smiled, they perked up, every time he snarled, they wanted to curl back, when he frowned, they flattened, and so on. That would take some getting used to. He had also discovered that each and every item in this room actually existed. Now, the drawers and wardrobe were no longer just cosmetic and were now filled to the brim with copies of outfits that he had in his inventory when the servers shut down, including the armor and jewelry. The books in his personal shelves were now real, to the contents specifically being his favorite ninja books, manga and such. Many of them were books he wanted to attain IRL, but never had the chance to. His desk, meanwhile, now had real papers and writing utensils in it. The bed was an actual bed that he could sleep in. Everything was real. Some items that didn't exist in-game were even here, now, like the dream version, his otaku shrine. Being such close friends with Perrin Roncino, it was hard not to be corrupted, not that he minded too much. A conflicted smile spread across his face at the thought, fond of the memories while uneasy about his new situation. This will definitely take some getting used to, he commented. Then, his musings were interrupted by a female voice ringing in his head. Lord Kurama, she said, sounding confused. This is Shaltir. The young-sounding woman was speaking to him through a low tier spell called Message. As the name implied, it was a communication spell. What's wrong? It would appear that the swamplands outside of Nazarick are gone. Naruto frowned. That didn't sound good. Please clarify what you mean by gone. Back in Yggdrasil, the great tomb of Nazarick was located in a poisonous swamp of Niflheim. It was always nighttime and shrouded in a thick, perpetual mist. If Shaltir was implying what he thought she was, then the tomb as a whole was somehow transported elsewhere. I mean that the landscape is completely different, she told him. The great tomb is now surrounded by a flat, grassy plain, the skies are clear, the mist is gone, and the sun is up. The only landmarks I can spot from here are a forest to the north and a distant mountain range to the northwest. She'd cast a quick location spell to make sure, but yes, they were in those specific directions. 2. Naruto, meanwhile, frowned. That didn't sound like Nazarick's location in the fucking slightest. Come to think of it, though, wasn't this the first time Shaltir has been outside the Great Tomb? How was she aware of what its surroundings were supposed to look like? Deciding that he'd ask her later, Naruto issued his orders. Retreat to the tomb and meet me at the amphitheater, he commanded. Bring Seabass with you. On my way, milord. With that done, the kitsune cast a message of his own to revise the orders of a certain succubus. Albedo, he barked. Change of plans, the Guardians are to drop what they're doing and meet me at the amphitheater, save for Gargantua. Let him sleep. I'll explain why once everyone's there. Understood, milord, she replied. The instant he received her response, the Vulpine demon disappeared in a poof of smoke. Naruto instantly reappeared in the same manner as he vanished in the center of a mighty stone coliseum. The oval-shaped building stood nestled in the middle of the 6th floor's lush rainforest. The scenery, including the skybox with a day and night cycle, was built and crafted with love and care by a guild member named Blue Planet. As his name would imply, the man was an environmentalist who longed to see the world as it once was, before it had been covered in a cloud of industrial and orbital pollution that blocked out the sun, the price of taking too long to colonize other worlds, many claimed. As for the structure, it was around 600 feet long, 500 wide, and just a little over 12 stories tall. At nighttime, which the skybox was currently set to, the continual light spell enchantments activated to bathe the arena in white light. The arena was modeled after the Roman Colosseum, save for a few creative liberties, such as the whole thing being black in color, and the architecture being more imposing. With the sole exception of a massive, 1,500-strong invasion, every last poor bastard dumb enough to intrude upon the home of Ainz Ooal Gown met their end here, if not sooner. It was quite frankly their guild's greatest achievement, partially made possible by the menagerie of high-level monsters they kept stored away in the lower levels of this coliseum to face off against intruders in brutal melee. In the waning days of Yggdrasil, this was also where he set up a PvP date with Momonga Senpai so that Naruto could adjust his build. While there were other ways to go about it, dying and getting rezzed with the spell Raise Dead was simply the most effective way to do so, and since Momonga-senpai started finding himself with less and less time to help, Naruto needed a few levels in Necromancer to properly maintain certain aspects of the Great Tomb. He only sported just enough to get the job done, but that was all he needed, specifically sacrificing 5 levels in Rogue to that end, since they were the most expendable. Of course, Momonga-senpai was more than happy to help and even offered his advice on which spells would be the most useful, though 1 or 2 were chosen purely for the coolness factor. It was the most fun they'd had in a long time, to be honest. 3. Pushing his nostalgia aside, Naruto looked around. Now, then, where were those twins? Then out of the corner of his eye, the Yuko saw a bit of movement in the VIP box and spotted a small, live form leaping out just before landing in front of him in a crouch. There was no magic involved, just pure, physical prowess. The form in question was that of a little girl, apparently somewhere between 10 to 13 years old. It was hard to tell, really, partially because of her race. The girl had dark skin and an unruly mop of gold that tickled her shoulders. Her long, pointed ears made it clear that she was a dark elf, a species related to forest elves. 4. She looked up and smiled at him, showing herself to be a somewhat androgynous cutie with a heart-shaped face and mismatched eyes, one green and the other blue. She was garbed in leather armor reinforced with red dragon scales underneath her white vest and matching trousers. The crest of Ainz Ooal Gown was proudly displayed on her vest in gold. The elven girl finished her look with thick leather gloves, reinforced with metal plates, a golden acorn pendant around her neck, brown leather shoes and a metallic whip coiled up at her hip. Naruto immediately recognized her as Aura Bellafiora, one of the 2 creations of Byukubokugama, both of whom were the guardians of the 6th floor, and as with all the others, she was far more expressive than he remembered, bouncing adorably on the balls of her feet as she eagerly saluted him. "Hello, Lord Kurama," she chirped. "What brings you here?" "Something weird," Naruto admitted with a sigh. "I want to wait for the other floor guardians to arrive before I say what, though." "Fair enough," she said with a shrug. Then, Aura realized that her brother was conspicuously missing. Groaning in annoyance, she turned to the VIP booth and shouted, "Mayor, Lord Kurama has graced us with his presence. How long do you plan on being so rude to him?" "Sorry," a rather soft-spoken voice shouted back. "You know I hate heights. See, can't I just use the stairs?" "Oh, come on, now. Just jump already. You're making Lord Kurama wait." Aura groaned again as she returned her attention to Naruto. "I am so sorry, Lord Kurama," she lamented, turning towards the man in question. "Mayor's not trying to insult you, he's just really timid." "It's fine," Naruto chuckled, ruffling the girl's hair. "I understand perfectly." He couldn't help but smile at the exchange, having been reminded so much of Byukubokugama and her little brother, Parent Roncino. "Gah! Gah!" Speaking of little brothers, Aura's twin squealed girlishly all the way down as he relented, stumbling a bit as he landed on his feet and ran up to Naruto. Of course, because everyone in his guild was apparently some kind of weirdo, Mayor Bellafiore was not at all dressed like a boy. Much like his twin sister, he seemed rather androgynous, not at all helped by the feminine bob cut he sported. 5. He wore an identical vest to Aura's and an acorn-shaped pendant around his neck, though his was silver. His clothes also had the same basic white color scheme, but that was where the similarities ended in terms of their outfits. Instead, he wore a short skirt, long stockings, knee-high boots and a green cloak over his shoulders. The red in his outfit was replaced with blue and the gloves upon his dainty hands were much finer. Clutched in his grip was a gnarled, black wooden staff. That all aside, Mayor was unmistakably Aura's sibling, sharing the same face and hair color. He was just far more timid, fidgeting nervously before Naruto, and which of his eyes or which color had been switched. His ears also pointed slightly downwards while Aura's pointed up, hinting at their differing personalities. "No need to be so scared, I won't bite," Naruto teased, ruffling the boy's hair and causing his cheeks to go bright red. "Sorry," Mayor muttered shyly. Then, before anything else could be said, a swirling blackness emerged from the ground to create a semicircular doorway beside them. It was like someone's shadow came to life and lifted itself off of the ground. And then, a girl emerged from it, accompanied by Seabass. Her skin was pale as wax and the girl's silver locks were pulled back into a long ponytail. She appeared to be around 13 or 14, but knowing her creator, this girl was probably a 1,000-year-old loli or some shit. Though Naruto was intimately familiar with her build, having often brought the girl along to defend Nazarick from invaders after most of the guild had quit, he'd never actually read her bio for fear of mental scars. 6. But, despite her height and petite frame, the girl in question didn't quite look like a traditional loli as she apparently rocked quite the ample bosom for her age, keyword, apparently. Something seemed off about the way it bulged outward, but Naruto didn't quite know what. The Yuko wasn't sure he wanted to know either. That aside, this new arrival was garbed in black and dark pink with hints of white. She wore a soft, elegant ball gown, its skirt poofed out into a bell shape, along with a bonnet, bolero, and long gloves. The outfit covered nearly all of her skin and was almost excessively decorated with frills, lace and ribbons, and she twirled a matching parasol in her hands. The girl's crimson eyes bore a seductive look as she eyeballed Naruto with a hungry grin. This was Sheltier Bloodfallen, creation and magnum opus to Paranrancino. The sun didn't bother you, did it? Naruto asked. While he never read her bio, the red-haired man knew she was a vampire, so he felt the need to be sure. All things considered, he wasn't sure how her kind would be affected in this new situation. She did mention that the sun was up, after all. 7. Not at all, Sheltier chirped, giving him a reassuring smile. It slowed me down, but that was the extent of its effects. So, sunlight still had the same effects here as it did in Yggdrasil, then? Good to know, Naruto replied with a smile on his own. Then, he was taken aback when Sheltier suddenly closed the gap between them in a blur of inhuman speed. He caught a whiff of her very enticing perfume when she leaned forward with a giggle. Thank you so much for your concern. Sheltier purred. Unfortunately, before she could properly start putting the moves on Naruto, Aura decided to butt in with a scoff. Something stinks, the elven girl commented. You didn't start decomposing, did you? And of course, Sheltier didn't take kindly to that, excuse me? Whirling around to face Aura, she gave her an indignant look. I will have you know that this is the finest of perfumes. Quite predictably, the little vampire was quick to retaliate, and Aura only returned fire with a harshness that could only come from a sibling, despite the girls not being at all related themselves. You might want to get your money back, fake tits, she scoffed. It smells like shit. I never. Naruto couldn't help but find a bit of guilty pleasure in their exchange. They were acting just like a pair of catty sisters, thoroughly reminding him of the bickering he'd often hear from Paranrancino and Bukubukagama. So noisy, a deep, gravelly voice commented, turning everyone's attention towards its source. The being lumbered forth, just over 10 feet tall and resembling a bipedal insect apparently made of ice. He had 3 eyes on either side of his head, a long tail lashed about behind him, and his powerful mandibles looked like they could sever a man's arm in one bite. In one of his multiple 3-fingered hands, he carried a long, platinum halberd. 2 clouds of frost spewed from his face as he huffed at the ruckus caused by Sheltier and Aura. The creature in question was Cocytus, ruler of glaciers, guardian of the 5th floor and creation of warrior Takamikazuchi, a man who was all but obsessed with samurai and all things martial. It more or less reflected in Cocytus' sparse profile, if not his appearance. You stand before a supreme being, Cocytus said, not at all amused by their lack of discipline. Contain yourselves. The brat started it, Sheltier muttered, pouting childishly. Actually, Aura started. That's enough, you two, Naruto interjected with a warm chuckle. As if a switch had been flipped, the two of them immediately composed themselves. Aura bowed and Sheltier gave him a curtsy as they replied in perfect unison. Yes, me lord. Naruto's smile only widened at that. It was just so cute. I do hope those two haven't been causing you any trouble, Albedo called out as she too entered the arena. She was accompanied by two others, the last two floor guardians, save for Gargantua, victim of the 8th floor and Demiurge of the 7th. 8. The former was an angel, though said creature looked like anything but, taking on the form of a bright pink fetus, roughly 3 feet long, with branches of holly for wings. A nostalgic grin graced Naruto's face when he saw the small creature. Back when the union of 8 guilds with the aid of mercenary NPCs forming a massive party, 1,500 strong, no less rated Nazarick, it was Victim who played a key role in stopping them, which made Naruto think. That massive party was halted at the 8th floor, meaning literally everyone here, but Albedo had died in that battle. Even Naruto himself. To be fair, he was still experimenting with his build at the time, thus horribly underleveled from constantly suiciding his character and quickly one-shot, by one of their tanks, no less. In his defense, she also just so happened to be a paladin, but that was neither here nor there. Naruto had to wonder, though, did they even remember anything before this apparent transition to a new world? Did they remember dying? Pushing such grim thoughts aside for later, Naruto eyeballed the last arrival to this meeting. The man in question was a demon who very much lived up to his name, as one would expect from his creator, Albert Ainz Ooal. Granted, one would be forgiven for thinking Demiurge was an elf, given his sharp features, thin build, and pointed ears, but the fangs and long, spiked tail were a dead giveaway. The gangly man wore a red and white pinstripe suit with black, leather shoes, black gloves and opaque, round-lens spectacles with minimalistic, but still ornate frames. His skin was lightly tanned and his hair slicked back, making him look very much like a stereotypically evil businessman or politician. As per your orders, Lord Kurama, Albedo said, all of the floor guardians except for Gargantua are now present. She bowed before Naruto and the other guardians followed suit, one by one, though Victim had to settle for dipping lower to the ground. Right, the Yuko muttered. Then, he cleared his throat and addressed them professionally. Before I summoned you all here, I sensed that there was something wrong. He decided to avoid gaming terms so as not to confuse them. Given that Albedo didn't recognize what a GM was, it was probably safe to assume that they didn't perceive Yggdrasil as a game. After sending Seabass to scout the area with Sheltir, he gestured to the beings in question as he mentioned them. It was brought to my attention that the Great Tomb of Nazarick was somehow transported to another world. Literally no part of Nibelheim even remotely fits Sheltir's description, so that was a fair assessment of their situation. Most of the floor guardians and their leader looked confused and concerned to hear that. I have no idea what caused this to happen, Naruto continued. But I'm feeling a bit paranoid about our new situation for obvious reasons. He eyeballed those present, one by one. Does anyone here happen to know what might have caused this, by any chance? I'm terribly sorry, my love, but I do not, Albedo lamented. I, too, am quite puzzled by this turn of events, Demiurge added. The other floor guardians' responses were similarly negative, as was Seabass. Naruto hummed thoughtfully. Have any of you noticed anything out of place in the past hour or so? I certainly have not, Sheltir answered. Aside from the obvious, of course. Of course. Nothing strange on my floor, Cocytus said, deciding to take his turn after her. Following his lead, Aura chimed in. Nothing weird on this floor. It's as she said, Mare added timidly. There've been no anomalies on the 7th floor either, Demiurge said, looking puzzled. The 8th floor has been untouched since you left, milord, Victim stated. The princesses are making yet another ruckus, but that is the only thing of note at the moment. Knowing exactly whom the angel was referring to, Naruto shifted uncomfortably. That was yet another situation he wasn't sure how to deal with. I've noticed nothing amiss, either milord, Seabass chimed in. I haven't noticed anything out of place either, Lord Kurama, Albedo told him with a frown on her face. Nor have Oriole and Gargantua for that matter. I'm so sorry that I can't be of more help. That's actually very helpful, Naruto assured. Straightening himself like he imagined a real leader might, the Yuko addressed everyone present. It means that whatever caused this was likely outside of Nazarick at the time. Then, he squinted, his ears flattening as he donned a puzzled look of his own. It is unsettling, though, speaking of outside, he added, turning to Mare. If I remember right, you're a druid, Mare? Why yes, me lord. Would you happen to know Move Earth? Mare perked up at that. Yes, me lord. Good, Naruto chirped. I'm gonna want you to head outside with me and see what we can do to conceal the tomb. The last thing we need right now is an uninvited guest, and being on a flat plane means we stick out like a sore thumb. He then turned to Albedo. Until further notice, the safety of Nazarick and her people is my top priority. Put everyone on high alert and report anything out of place the instant you spot it, no matter how small. 9. As you wish, Lord Kurama. A company of 50 men rode towards the dying pillars of smoke with all their might. Gazef Stronov, the leader of the group, knew that he was too late to save this village, too, but he was gaining on these bastards. Like the three before it, the village had been put to the torch. He clicked his tongue in frustration at the sight of its butchered populace. Even the children hadn't been spared. What's the nearest settlement? Gazef asked, looking to a man more familiar with the area. Karn village, the soldier replied. It's 10 miles north of here. Lead the way, then. With that, the company pressed on, passing by the town without a second thought. They knew they wouldn't find any survivors. There were never any survivors left in these bastards' wake. Henry looked behind as she and her sister ran, hand in hand, and saw that those two soldiers were still chasing them to her dismay. But, she grit her teeth and kept going. A little voice in her head told her that she should just ditch the girl and run on her own, but she viciously strangled it. No, she couldn't do that. Ninu was her little sister. Hurry. Henry panted. We can shake them in the forest. I'd like to see you try, one of the soldiers cackled. Henry ignored him and ran as fast as her legs could carry her, practically dragging poor Ninu along as they entered the forest. Though the foliage slowed the soldiers down more than it did the girls, given how familiar Henry and Ninu were with this forest, the two men still gained on them. Then, Ninu stumbled and took her big sister down with her. Henry narrowly evaded the soldier's attack, and with a roar of fury and desperation, she punched him in the head with all her might. She felt something pop and ignored the pain while scooping her sister back up and bolting once more. The soldier, meanwhile, staggered back. Though his helmet absorbed the blow, it still dazed the hell out of him. As he toppled over, his comrade stumbled clumsily to avoid tripping over him and slammed into a nearby tree. But, they recovered quickly and were hot on the girl's heels once more. Then, moments later, Henry gasped, a line of hot pain across the woman's back racking her to the core. She fell to her knees, clutching her little sister close. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she instinctively shielded Ninu as best she could. It's over, one of the men said, panting heavily from the chase. Though he was highly trained, the plate armor favored by the Baharuth Empire still weighed him down and his helmet made it hard to breathe. It did a number on his stamina, but he managed. After having stayed in the arena for a bit, testing to see if their relocation to this new world had affected their magic and abilities by using some of those monsters in the amphitheater as living targets, Naruto was pleased to note that there were no differences he could spot, save for friendly fire being a thing, now. That wasn't a surprise, though. Hell, all things considered, it would have been surprising if friendly fire wasn't a factor now. That said, once he was satisfied with his findings, and done with concealing the tomb, Naruto dismissed Mare and returned to the throne room where Albedo was waiting for him. Soon after sitting down, the redhead found himself looking into a floating mirror, roughly 4 feet tall and 2 feet wide. The image therein, however, was not his reflection, but a field of grass. This was a mirror of remote viewing, a mid-tier magic item that allowed the user to view any area from a long distance, save for those protected from scrying like enemy guild bases. He could still use it to scan Nazarick, but entrusted that task to the floor guardians while he used the mirror to scout the surrounding area. The lush field was so different from Niflheim, and it stretched for miles. But, then, he noticed a pillar of smoke in the distance and waved his hand. The image changed to the sight of a small village being attacked by men in armor. It was a shocking and gruesome display, but what troubled Naruto the most was that it excited him. The very thought appalled him, but it did. The carnage, the sight of blood, the pain and suffering in the eyes of the women and children as even they weren't spared, it filled him with a horrible glee that terrified the man behind the fox. 10. Naruto frowned in thought, rubbing his chin. In Yggdrasil, he had a karma rating of -500, which translated to him being as evil as possible. This was because it gave him access to quite a few spells and 2 classes he wouldn't be able to use otherwise, all of which were vital to his build. Strictly speaking, though, that was the only effect it had in-game. But now, was that karma rating why he felt this way? Well, he couldn't just sit here and watch, as much as he apparently wanted to. No, why would he though? These pitiful creatures were but insects. Aura, Mare, and Oriole were exceptions, of course, but any humanoid beyond them only existed for his pleasure. Why should he? Naruto shook his head to dislodge those ghastly thoughts. Why? Because it's the right thing to do, of course. According to whom, though? Naruto couldn't answer that, and what scared him most was that he didn't know why. No, it's not the right thing to do, but the smartest. How so? Shut up, you. I know what I'm doing. Is everything all right? Albedo asked, looking concerned. You seem troubled, my love. Naruto hesitated, his ears flicking about. Yes, I'm just thinking is all. He turned to her. How quickly can you be ready for battle? Albedo looked surprised to hear that. In an instant, me lord. It was not an exaggeration, because of the quick change gem on her clothing, she could quite literally change into her battle gear in the blink of an eye. If I may, why do you ask? It was then that Naruto spotted a cute blonde dragging a little girl to the woods, chased down by 2 soldiers. He couldn't help but think the woman had such an unfortunate hairdo. 11. We're going to collect a debt, Naruto replied ominously. Yes, that was the reason. Why let such a good opportunity for information go to waste? He'd swoop in, kill the soldiers, and accept information about this new world as his payment. As a bonus, it would also give him the opportunity to see how he stacked up to the people of this world. Moments later, Shaltir stood in the throne room, using the mirror to track the blonde who'd caught the eye of the last Supreme One. A frowning Naruto and an appropriately geared Albedo stood behind her, ready for battle. The succubus, at Lord Kurama's behest, was garbed in her full-plate black armor with a frogmouth helm specially built to accommodate her horns. Her wings were hidden, retracted into her back so she could pass for a human, and in her hands, Albedo held a wicked, black bardiche. 12. Gate. With a cry and an outstretched hand, Shaltir willed a black, semicircular vortex to appear before them. The spell in question was one of the most potent and accurate in all of Yggdrasil, rocking a 0% chance of teleportation mishaps and a literally infinite range, as long as the target didn't happen to be near or inside anti-teleportation wards. The only reason Naruto didn't know it himself was because his choices in classes simply didn't allow it. The blonde nodded at Shaltir. Use the mirror to keep an eye on us, he told her, narrowing his eyes at the swirling mass of chaos. I don't want to take any chances, and we don't know what these people are capable of. Shaltir bowed her head. Of course, me lord. Naruto offered the small vampire another nod and, without hesitation, went first, drawing his sword. The scenery changed in an instant to that of the blonde's location as he stepped through the portal. The soldiers trembled before him and a sadistic grin spread across Naruto's face. He approached them, using his shadow step ability so as not to make a sound while he did. Then, when one of them attacked, he cast his spell. Silent Magic, Cloud of Knives. When he did so, Naruto used the meta-magic ability Silent Magic so that he didn't have to shout the name and potentially alert any nearby soldiers. Such abilities were quite useful for magic casters in Yggdrasil, enhancing spells in countless potential ways so as to allow for even the lowest tier incantations to be useful, no matter how strong one's opponent is. They could also add to the already ridiculous versatility of being a magic caster. As for why the spell itself didn't make any noise, that was because of another ability, Arcane Stealth. It was an ability unique to beguilers which hushed any sounds that would otherwise be made by a spellcast with silent magic. And by the time a terrified Henry looked to see what was going on, the two soldiers were, for lack of a better word, gone. She looked about ready to hurl at the sight. All that remained of the men was a pair of red stains upon the ground, their mangled armor now completely unrecognizable. She knew not how he did it, nor did she want to, and then, he turned his attention to her and smiled. As soon as he sheathed his sword, Henry heard the distinct clatter of someone in full plate approaching. Fearing that it was another one of those soldiers, she looked in the direction of that blackness and saw that it had already disappeared. In its place was a woman in black plate, armed with a massive boltiaxe. Henry had no idea whether to be relieved or terrified. Unbeknownst to her, as the red-haired man with 9 tails approached, she had a damn good reason to be scared. This girl was pretty cute and healthy. She had a nice rack, wide hips, a slender but toned physique. She smelled nice, too. The lingering scent of her tears and that of her blood were very enticing for some reason. He wanted her, he wanted to feel her warmth, to hear her screams, to see tears spilling anew from those lovely, honey-colored eyes as he tore that brown and yellow dress to shreds and had his way with her. It's not like anyone would miss these two, after all, and the little one would also make for a nice pet. No. Naruto took a calming breath and resisted, hiding his inner struggles quite well. I'm here for information, he told himself. That would just make it harder to get for no good reason. If there were any women among the people attacking the village, though, well, they were fair game, right? Forcibly pushing those thoughts aside, Naruto cautiously drew closer to the young woman and kneeled before her. Producing a little vial of red liquid, he handed it to her. Drink this, he said. Be blood? Henry muttered. That's what it looked like to her. She turned pale. Was he planning to turn her into a demon or something? Naruto stared at her oddly. Did this mean that healing potions didn't exist in their world? Did that word mean something else in their language? Did they even understand him? 13. The blonde timidly accepted the vial, but then, her little sister panicked. Henry, no! Ninu cried out. Don't do it! Excuse me? Albedo growled. Her tone sent a cold shiver up the woman's spine. My lord just saved you pathetic insects out of the kindness of his heart and yet you dare question him? I'll do it, Henry sputtered, establishing once and for all that she indeed spoke the same language. Just please, don't hurt my sister. Albedo raised her bardiche poised to lop the blonde's head off. You'd better, you worm. Now. No need to be so hasty, Naruto looked at her, his sharp gaze ordering her to stand down. They've been through a lot and are just scared is all. The enraged succubus immediately calmed down, her mood doing an uncomfortably swift 180. My apologies, Lord Kurama. He raised an eyebrow at her. I'm not the one you should be apologizing to. Why should she apologize to them, though? Naruto's eye twitched again and he quickly and forcefully pushed that annoying voice in his head to the side. Albedo quirked her own eyebrow at the kitsune, though no one could see it, with her helm covering her head. He then made a gesture to the girls, reading her body language like a book. What he wanted from her finally came to the succubus. She didn't want to do such a thing, but to question or defy him was nothing short of blasphemous, and, well, as long as it was for his benefit. I apologize. Albedo sounded like it took every fiber of her being to be respectful towards these creatures, but did as she was asked. Naruto figured that was the best he was going to get out of her and didn't push it. He gave her a satisfied nod and turned to address the girls. This is a healing potion from my homeland, he explained. It wasn't untrue, it just felt weird to put it that way. You have nothing to worry about. I'm Kurama, by the way, and this is Albedo, we're here to help. Ainz visibly calmed down at that and drank the potion without hesitation. She felt a warm sensation wash over her and, in an instant, the pain was gone. Even her hand felt fine. Looking down, she moved it experimentally and saw that it was no longer stiff. Then, she reached behind and patted her back. Her dress was still ruined and the blood was still there, but the wound was gone. Ainz then smiled, looked Naruto in the eye, and bowed as best she could in her position. 14. Thank you, Lord Kurama, she said. Given how this Albedo woman addressed him and how he dressed, he was clearly some degree of nobility. So of course he was entitled to such respect. Albedo, meanwhile, grudgingly approved of the respect she displayed. At least the worm knows her place. You're welcome, Naruto chirped, giving the blonde a wide, charming smile. Then, he turned to Albedo. Slaughter anyone attacking the village, except for their leader, he ordered. I want to capture him alive for interrogation. Leave the villagers be for now. With pleasure, milord. The way she said that shook Ainz to the core. In that moment, she knew how lucky they were to have these two on their side, at least for now, and how important it was for her to ensure they stay on it. But, would she be able to? If so, how? She had nothing of value to give, and it wasn't like a man of his standing would accept a common girl like her as payment, right? Ainz didn't know how to feel about that option, if it even was on the table. But he was clearly a kind lord, and quite handsome. She felt her cheeks burn at the thought. Sheltir, keep an eye on her and let me know the instant she needs help. As you wish, milord. Then, Albedo disappeared in a blur of speed, scaring poor Ainz even more and pulling a pair of yelps from the girls. She's scary, Mimu commented with all the bluntness and tact one would expect from a child. Sorry about her. She's not fond of commoners, Naruto said apologetically. Getting on this woman's good graces would allow him to find out a little more about this world, after all. That made him think, though. This is a bit of a random question, but do you know about magic? Ainz perked up at that. Why yes, actually, she replied. A friend of mine is an alchemist who visits Karn village every now and then. I just didn't recognize your healing potion because the ones he makes are blue. Blue. Interesting. Karn village, Naruto repeated thoughtfully, filing the information about the potions away for later. Is that the name of your home? Yes. Well, let's make sure you have a home to return to, then. With that, Naruto reached into a black hole of some kind that briefly appeared before his hand and pulled out two small horns with leather straps. Hide in the woods until I come back, he said. If you get into trouble, blowing one of these will call some allies to help you out. The little horns were two copies of a low-tier magic item from his world, called the Horn of the Goblin General. Despite its name, it only summoned 12 of the little buggers, 2 archers, 2 riders and their wolf mounts, a cleric, a mage, and a commander being among them. In Yggdrasil, it was a trash item for noobs. Truth be told, Naruto only still had the damn things because he forgot to sell them, but given how easily those 2 soldiers died, they should do the trick, hopefully. Why does it matter if they don't though? Quiet, you. I cannot thank you enough, Ainz said. I couldn't possibly hope to repay you. Don't sweat it, Naruto said, giving her a charming grin. Then, he turned to leave and paused looking at his staff and letting out a sheepish chuckle. How did I not notice that I brought this with? Ainz turned beet red at that. Still, though. I owe you my life, and my sister's. Well, as I'm sure you noticed, I'm not from around here, Naruto told her with a chuckle. Tell me everything you know about where we are when I get back to you and we'll call it even. Then, he disappeared in a poof of smoke, drawing a startled yelp from the blonde. Ainz looked around and saw that he really was gone. Then, she sighed, a dissatisfied pout marring her pretty face. That's hardly a fair trade, though. A feminine roar filled the air, a sign for this slaughter to become a different kind of massacre. In the blink of an eye, the hunters became the hunted as a woman in black armor leapt into the fray. Lans di Jalanpo swore under his breath more times in the past 10 minutes than ever in his life. He was a faithful man, one who'd look down upon those who didn't worship his gods as fools, but when she appeared, each and every swing of her axe cutting his men down like wheat, cleaving armor and bone alike with ease, he couldn't help but question if the gods existed himself. Kill her! The woman cackled maniacally, taking 3 down with a single swing. During their attack on Karn village, Lan's forces had chased all of the villagers to the town square and surrounded them, prepared to slaughter each and every last one of them, but now, not even half of his men remained. This should have been impossible, for men in full plate armor to be cleaved through like paper, for them to fly through the air like a child's playthings. It was inconceivable. Ra-ha-ha-ha-ha. Albedo, meanwhile, didn't give a shit. She just plowed through their ranks like a pissed-off rhino, laughing gleefully all the way at the havoc she wrought. It was just so fun. The screams of pain and terror, the scent of their blood, the looks of pain and horror, it was exhilarating. 15. Our retreat. One of the soldiers turned and screamed like a little girl, and soon enough, a general rout had followed. Run for your lives. She'll kill us all. Mommy. Make it stop. Get back in formation. Lans shouted desperately. Don't turn your backs on her, you fools. Unfortunately for these puny insects, Albedo was faster than them, and she took great pleasure in exploiting how vulnerable they were. The carnage only continued from there, the villagers cowering in fear, but she ignored them. It was like they didn't even exist. No, it was the soldiers she wanted. All except for their leader, as per the orders of her love. Speaking of, Lans didn't know what happened. But, for some reason, his whole body seemingly forgot how to move and he went utterly limp. He was still conscious, but no matter how hard he tried, his body would not obey. Then, a shadow loomed over Lan's prone form and flipped him onto his belly with a kick. Naruto quickly got to work in hog-tying his new prisoner. After hearing this guy barking orders, he easily identified the poor sap as their leader. The Yuko looked different, though, so as not to startle the villagers too much. Most notably, his vulpine traits were missing and his eyes looked like those of a human, though they retained the same color. It wasn't an illusion, either. This was made possible by one of his racial classes, Kitsune. Since his species was one of shapeshifters, he could take on the form of any humanoid or demi-human at will with the ability alter self, provided that the new form is no less than half his size, minus the tails. The change was purely cosmetic, though. He wouldn't inherit the naturally sharp hearing of an elf or the hardiness of a dwarf, for example, by taking on said forms. And though he never tried taking on the form of a woman, let alone long enough to find out for obvious reasons, Naruto assumed that he wouldn't inherit a certain drawback either. As for why it took him so long to get here, well, after noticing that he'd carried the staff of Ainz Ooal Gown here without realizing it, he took a quick, little detour as it were. That way, if any hostiles that he and Albedo couldn't deal with on their own were here, he wouldn't have to worry about it being destroyed. Sorry for the scare, Naruto called out. We mean you no harm. Gah! Of course, the death rattle of that one last soldier didn't help. The Yuko cleared his throat, pushing back his amusement at the Wilhelm scream. That said, he continued awkwardly, I'm not going out of my way to help you for free. He gestured towards Albedo. She and I are not from around here, in fact, we're from very far away and we got lost, so we will gladly accept any information you have about our location as payment. It made more sense than the truth, in all honesty, and Naruto somehow doubted that anyone here, even Albedo, would believe him if he told them about his actual situation. I see. The comment came from an elderly man among the crowd as he stepped forth. May we have the privilege of knowing our saviors' names? Naruto hesitated for a moment as Albedo came to his side. He had a lot of questions about this world, but some new ones came to mind in that moment. Was he the only player who came here? Would someone recognize his name if he wasn't? If there were any other players here, would they be nearby? Come to think of it, Naruto had no reason to believe he was the only player here. With that thought in mind, Naruto stood up and approached the man with the grace of a nobleman, hands behind his back. There may be a way to find out. I am known as Ainz Ooal Gown, he declared. You can call me Ainz. He then gestured to a rather befuddled succubus and continued. This is my wife, Albedo. It took every ounce of the woman's self-control for her not to flinch at the word wife. Because of his keen senses, Naruto could see and hear many of the villagers whispering quietly, commenting on how foreign his name sounded. Good. If he was lucky, they'd spread that name like wildfire. In Yggdrasil, that name carried with it quite a bit of infamy, especially after they successfully repelled that 8-guild alliance. The fact that they were among the top 10 guilds in their heyday only made it more so. If anyone from Yggdrasil was in this new world, they'd likely recognize that name immediately and hopefully seek him out? Of course, there was no guarantee that would happen, but it seemed to be worth a shot nonetheless. Pushing those thoughts aside, he then addressed the elderly man once more. Am I right to assume that you are the leader of this village? It felt weird talking like this, but it was pretty likely that they thought he was a man of high standing, given his attire and the fact that he was accompanied by a woman in full plate, so he did his best to sound the part. Naruto was not too surprised when the man shook his head. He was killed in the attack. I'm sorry to hear that, the disguised Yuko said. He sounded sincere, but deep inside, Naruto was unnerved to note that he felt nothing but complete apathy. Seriously, what the fuck was going on with him? I hope you get back on your feet soon, then. He paused for a moment before giving the man a charming smile. Now, about that information? Of course, the man replied. If you and your wife wish to rest, then please do feel free to talk in my house where you can have a seat. It's still intact, by some miracle. Thank you, Naruto chirped. Then, the young man perked up as if he'd just remembered something. Oh, one more thing. There were these 2 girls I helped on my way here. They're hiding in the forest right now. I should go fetch them before I do that. Very well, then, the elderly man said with a respectful bow. Chapter 3, Confrontation. The old man who was apparently serving as this village's de facto chief for the time being lived in a quaint, little hovel near the village square. It was sparsely furnished and what few personal effects he had were entirely functional. The house itself, meanwhile, was all one big room, reminding Naruto of his studio apartment in the real world? The other one? Questions for later. The room was exclusively illuminated by natural light from the windows, though they did their job well enough, and a rickety table sat in the center of it all. Naruto eyeballed the woman, presumably this guy's wife, slaving away at the fireplace and then took a gander at the farming tools. As expected, there wasn't much of anything in the way of modern technology, though it did beg the question of how magic would affect this world's development if it hasn't already. The woman herself, like her presumed husband, was remarkably toned for her age, at least by Naruto's standards. It really put into perspective how rough a medieval farm life could be in comparison to that of the modern-day peasantry. Naruto and Albedo took a seat while the elderly man sat before them. What is it you wish to know? As much as you can give, Naruto told him. The lay of the land. The nation. The leaders. Anything you can tell us. He sighed, taking a moment to choose his words and continued. To say that I'm not from around here is an understatement. He paused a bit, letting his words sink in and then shifted to his true form, all 9 tails and his vulpine ears fading into existence, his pupils slitting and irises glowing. I was passing myself off as a human because I didn't want to startle everyone while dealing with those bastards. The man and woman could only stare. Truth be told, Albedo and I are from another world entirely, Naruto said. Our home ended up in this world and we want to figure out how, but to do that, we first need to know where. Here is for lack of a better way to put it. Right, the old man replied hesitantly, not quite knowing how to react. Given what you've done for us, that's the least we could do. He caught himself before he could stare at Naruto's tails, not wanting to be rude. Forgive me, but, if you don't mind me asking, what are you, exactly? I am what is known as a kitsune, a race of fox people with the ability to shapeshift. Shapeshift, Naruto explained. My wife and I are from Nibelheim. You probably wouldn't have heard of it. Assuming this wasn't a Nordic world? Naruto saw no indications that it was, though said culture wasn't very visually distinct from the rest of Europe in the medieval period from what he could tell, so it was hard to say for sure. I can assure you that I haven't, the man told him, looking just a little overwhelmed. Well, to start, you are in Karn village, part of the Riastai's kingdom. To the south is the slain theocracy and to the west is the Baharuth Empire, which is where the men who attacked us are from if that armor is anything to go by. Safe to assume that they're at war with the kingdom, then, Naruto mused aloud. It would appear that they are now. The kingdom and the empire clash regularly, but an outright invasion like this hasn't happened in some time as far as I'm aware. So they have a potential enemy. And it's an empire. Great, he hoped it was nothing like the empires of old. Naruto was far more of a ninja otaku than a general history guy, but even he knew that'd be a pain in his ass. If this Baharuth Empire, which Nazarick now bordered as well, was anything like the Roman Empire, then Naruto's just had another reason to focus on gathering information and bolstering the Great Tomb's defenses. 1. Hiding his worry as best he could, Naruto rubbed his chin with a thoughtful frown. I see, he said. Please continue. The old man nodded and did just that. Once Naruto and Albedo left the de facto chief's house, they'd learned quite a bit about this new world. Like in Yggdrasil, this world had multiple races and monsters of all sorts: dwarves, elves, goblins, orcs, ogres, and the like. Something called the Wise King of the Forest also apparently lived somewhere in the great forest of Tob. No one knew what the hell it was as though, so they should probably look into that. Given her skill set, Naruto decided that he should send Aura in there to do so and find out what else might be hiding in there. Also, according to the de facto chief, Yggdrasil was the biggest nearby city. Though he didn't know how big the population was, it seemed like a good place to gather information. All in all, the old man was very helpful. There were, of course, some details he simply could not provide, but that was to be expected of a man who spent his life in the boonies. Then, soon after Naruto received every last bit of information the old man had to give, someone knocked on the door and informed them that the funeral was ready to begin. Of course, Naruto and Albedo paid their respects, if only to seem polite, but when Naruto spotted Enri leaving, he soon followed her with his wife in tow. Feeling the eyes upon her, Enri turned around just in time to see Lord Kurama loom over her, slamming a hand on the wall behind her. Enri squeaked, her cheeks burning red, though she knew not why. Albedo, meanwhile, felt like choking a bitch for reasons similarly unknown. So, Naruto said charmingly, putting on his best smile, about that payment. At that, Enri's cheeks felt like they were on fire as her teenage hormones left the poor thing jumping to literally all of the best and worst conclusions she possibly could, with no in-between, at the same time. Oh, my gods. 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 2. By the time Naruto was done interrogating the poor, flustered Enri, asking around for directions to Yggdrasil, and presenting himself as a good Samaritan, he noticed that the sun was already starting to set. Holy shit, we've been out here for this long? Naruto honestly could not believe it. But then, just as he was about to take his leave, a terrible commotion rose from the southern reaches of Karn village. Well, shit, Naruto muttered. Might as well see what's going on, I guess. Albedo frowned in concern under her helm, but said nothing as she dutifully followed. It didn't take long for them to approach the village square, and when they did, the former addressed a familiar old man. Something wrong, chief? Oh, Lord Ainz. The man looked relieved to see him. A troop of what looks like mounted soldiers are approaching. They're not uniformly equipped, though. I see, Naruto sighed and looked around. Many of the village folk looked utterly terrified, not that he could blame them. Pushing down and hiding the sadistic glee he felt from their expressions, the disguised kitsune shrugged. Can't be helped, he said. Gather everyone on the other side of the village. If they happen to be hostile, then I'll deal with them. Are you sure? Don't sweat it, Chief, it'd be a waste to let you all die now after I went through all of that trouble. Consider this a freebie. The de facto chief didn't know how to feel about that, but nodded and did as he said. As the villagers ran past him and Albedo, the two of them headed south to meet these men. The succubus trailed behind, ready to defend her love at a moment's notice. Then, soon enough, the horsemen came into view and Naruto quickly took note that they were indeed outfitted differently from one another. Were they bandits perhaps? The soldiers from before were all heavily armored, their breastplates bearing the sigil of the Baharuth Empire. These men were all lightly armored at the least, but very few of them were heavily so. And even those who were wearing full-plate donned armor of a very different design. Most, however, wore naught but mail hauberks and helmets, while some sported bits of plate for added protection. They all halted and their apparent leader dismounted, walking up to meet Naruto. He was the most striking of the men, with chiseled features and a scar on one cheek. He had short, brown hair and a matching beard, and his steely, coal-colored eyes lingered on Albedo for a moment, seemingly sensing something off about her, before turning to Naruto. I am Gazef Stronov, warrior captain of the Yggdrasil kingdom, he announced. I have been tasked with exterminating the raiders who've plagued these lands. And you are? Naruto could tell he wasn't lying, thanks to an ability known as sense motive. It was a passive skill available to rogues, bards, and ninja which allowed him to discern if someone was lying from a glance. In-game, it was of course completely useless against players, but came in quite handy for certain quests as it allowed him to unlock some secret side quests on occasion when interacting with NPCs. In this new world, however, it appeared to work on everyone. At the same time, though, Naruto probably didn't need this ability to tell the man was being sincere. The crests they wore also matched old man's description, and they were definitely geared like warriors of the Yggdrasil kingdom. Naruto smiled. This was a golden opportunity to establish good relations with the kingdom they ended up in. The reason this village is still here, Naruto told him. A foreigner by the name of Ainz Ooal Gown. Feel free to call me Ainz if you'd like, warrior captain. Gazef frowned at that, unable to believe that this man and his apparent companion would be enough to achieve such a thing alone, but at the same time, he couldn't sense any signs of deceit. I can vouch for him, the de facto chief chimed in as he approached. His wife was terrifyingly powerful, she did most of the work from what I could tell. Filing that information about the woman away for later, Gazef returned his attention to Naruto and offered him a respectful bow. Then I thank you for your generosity. I did it for a payment, so there's no need to thank me, Naruto told him with a sheepish chuckle. So, you're an adventurer? Close enough. I haven't joined any guilds, yet. Naruto was planning on doing so, but the closest one was apparently an Irantal. They even managed to capture the leader, the elderly man added. Really, now? Gazef looked at Naruto with interest. The red-haired man shrugged helplessly. Had a nearby friend question him, but she was too rough, he explained. After the dust had settled, he snuck him away, told Shaltir to open a gate, and chucked him in with the orders to bring that man to Neuronist Painkill. Unfortunately, said NPC lived up to her name a teensy bit too well and the little bitch died of shock as a result, but not before feeding them some very interesting nuggets of information. All she was able to get out of him before he died was that he was not their actual leader and that they were from the slain theocracy, Naruto continued. Apparently, they're trying to start a war between the kingdom and the empire. Or rather, a real one. That is troubling. Gazef muttered. Unfortunately, their conversation was interrupted by one of Gazef's men. Warrior Captain, he sputtered, looking winded, our scouts have spotted a massive force gathering around the village and closing in. They are of the slain theocracy. Everyone take heed, a voice spoke softly among the crowd as they took their positions. The little piggy has been snared. The speaker was a man with very plain features. His most outstanding traits were the black sclerae of his cold, blue eyes and a scar across his face. His golden hair was cropped incredibly short and he was garbed in priestly attire. His name was Nigan. Offer up your thanks to the gods. The group all bowed their heads and uttered silent prayers as per the traditions of their faith. It was required by their religion for them to do so before starting an operation in a foreign land. Once they were done, their commander gave the order to begin and they moved in as one. These men were a black ops group of the 6 scriptures, though their reputation was spread far and wide, little was actually known about them, mostly because they had a high bar to entry. To join, one had to be in excellent physical condition with an unshakable faith and the capacity to cast third-tier divine magic. In short, this group was the elite among the elite, and they went by the name Sunlight Scripture. For times, Gazef Stronov had evaded them, but now, they had him for sure. Next time, I'd like to ask other teams for help and have them do the work, Nigan commented. We should, one of his men concurred. Our specialty is extermination, after all. This is a strange mission, another commented. We usually have backup from the Windflower Scripture for something so important. It is strange indeed, Nigan mused aloud. I don't know why they only deployed us this time around, but it doesn't matter, our mission is to kill Gazef and we will succeed. Aura. His men cheered as one. Yes, they'd get him this time, that bitch with the jet black sword wasn't here to save him, of that, they were certain, and he had nowhere to run. Gazef peeked out from inside a darkened house on the outskirts of the village, his men and their horses hiding amongst the rubble. From what they could see 3 people from in there, all moving in unison, equally far apart from one another. Their robes implied that they were magic casters and the creatures who accompanied them, flying just above their formation, made it their specialty clear. Angels. The winged creatures seemed to be made of porcelain and golden light, semi-humanoid in shape, but jagged and monstrous with no visible faces. They were most notably favored by the slain theocracy, seen by the denizens thereof as messengers of the gods and practically confirming Ainz's claims even before the casters were close enough for the warrior captain to see their robes. The sigils on them removed all doubt. Who are these people and what do they want? Naruto asked. There's nothing of value in this village. That's where you're wrong, Gazef told him. They've been after my head for some time now. Oh, really? That was surprising. So, this was an assassination, and they had to know he was here. I'm guessing that raid from earlier was bait for this trap, then. So, it would seem. Though he didn't show it, Gazef was panicking deep inside. He turned to Naruto. Ainz, would you allow me to hire you? The redhead frowned thoughtfully. Tell me exactly what I'm up against and I'll consider it. I won't just jump into battle without knowing what I'm dealing with. Well, that was informative, Naruto mused aloud as he and Albedo slipped out of the town proper, shadowing Gazef and his forces. We're not going to save them, too, are we? Albedo asked, wondering why her love was acting like this. Naruto shrugged. Well, we are being paid, he replied. Also, it'd be smart in the long run to have allies. Albedo perked up at his words, stopping dead in her tracks, and Naruto swore he saw a little light bulb cartoonishly pop up over her head. Oh, so that's what you're planning. Eh? My deepest apologies, milord. I have no idea what I was thinking, Albedo lamented, bowing deeply. It's fine, Naruto said, giving her a sheepish chuckle. We all make mistakes. Seriously, though, what in the actual fuck was she on about? 3. Unfortunately, before he could ask, his train of thought was interrupted when he noticed a certain elven girl approaching. Lord Kurama, Aura whispered. Shaltir said you needed help. Ah, there you are, Naruto chuckled, ruffling her hair. He'd specifically asked the vampire to send her because she had the highest stealth skill in all of Nazarick, which would help avoid awkward questions. What's the status report on our forces? Demiurge is now helping Sheltir keep an eye on things, the elf told him. Cocytus and Mare have yet to see anyone approaching Nazarick, and I have those 8-edge assassins you wanted. What are your orders, me lord? The leader of those mounted soldiers just commissioned my help in defending this village, he replied. Our currency is useless here, so I accepted his offer. You're my second pair of eyes. If any of those angels and casters out there slip past his men, take him out. Gazef only has 50 men, so his forces are spread too thin to be of much use on their own. You focus on the south, while Albedo and I head north. Of course, Lord Kurama, Aura told him with a bow. Naruto gave her a nod and cast message. Demiurge, he said. Let me know where I need to plug any gaps. Also, don't be afraid to lend me and Aura some strategic advice, she's more of a scout than anything, after all, and I can't see everything from down here. 4. The demonic floor guardian responded immediately. As you wish, Lord Kurama. Given that Demiurge's bio made him out to be a tactician, it seemed safe to assume that Albert's creation would be quite good at the role he was given. As for Cocytus and Mare, they were put in charge of guarding Nazarick's perimeter in his absence. Alright, Naruto mused aloud, time to get down to business. He turned to Aura. Get in position, stay out of sight, and be ready to help Gazef's men. Yes, me lord. Aura chirped, giving him a salute, before running off to do precisely that. Naruto chuckled warmly at her enthusiasm. Then, he beckoned Albedo to follow. Now, let's catch up with them. A few minutes later, Naruto chuckled warmly as he followed Gazef, just out of earshot. You know, it was surprisingly hard to be as civil as I was with the humans of this world, he admitted. But I kinda like that one in particular, he reminds me of Touch Me Senpai. Is that why you accepted his request for our services? Albedo asked. Nah. Naruto shook his head. I just needed the money, really, and I was gonna defend the village anyways. I've got plans for it, after all, that in getting on his good side might be beneficial. Understood, me lord. Naruto could tell that she felt conflicted. He smiled and rubbed her back. Well, think of it this way, if we have allies, they can serve as a buffer between us and anyone who wants to do us harm. Albedo perked up at that and nodded. Ah, I see what you mean, she said. He's weak, but more expendable. His rank could also be of use. She could tell that he was roughly on par with some of Nazarick's more powerful pop monsters, but at the same time, the Nat could still use his sphere of influence to make things easier for them in the long run. As expected of a Supreme One. Albedo gushed as she realized just how useful this human could be for Lord's ultimate goal. Please forgive me for questioning you. It's fine, Naruto told her, looking rather sheepish. Be prepared to intervene, with them being so badly outnumbered, I'm not at all confident in Gazef's ability to survive for long. Of course, me lord. Meanwhile, with Gazef, he could feel his horse's agitation. He frowned. Even a trained warhorse, no, precisely because she was a warhorse, Beauty knew they were running towards certain death. But, it couldn't be helped. There were only about 20 actual men surrounding the village, but with the angels, Gazef's forces were outnumbered 2-1. Their encirclement was airtight, too. Gazef knew full well that he was riding into a trap and to spring it meant certain death, but there was simply no other choice. His men stood no chance against these bastards in ranged combat, so they had to close the gap if Gazef and the others were going to do jack shit against them. So, he planned accordingly and split his company into groups of 10, each one tasked with bull-rushing one of the commanders surrounding the village. Each charge was led by the heavy cavalry with the light cavalry close behind in hopes that they could finish the charge. It was an absolute last resort tactic, many of his men would die in this desperate assault. Still, though, this was their duty and these bastards would only pursue, and continue to burn and pillage while they were at it, if he fled. For the kingdom! Ainz shouted. Only the thunder of hooves and battle cries of his men followed as they all spurred their horses and charged. The angels met them with a charge of their own. Then, one of the mages they were charging at stretched out his hand and cast a spell of some kind. Ainz's horse neighed and started turning around, completely disobeying him, despite everything he tried. Damn it! Ainz cursed, his attempts at turning his steed around to face the enemy being futile. Then, he yelped, feeling something slam into his back. He thought it was the angel's spear at first, but immediately after the impact, he heard a feminine roar and cackle, followed by the distinct sound of someone being cleaved in half. The strongest warrior of the Ainz kingdom was quite familiar with that noise as he tended to make it on the battlefield. One swing of his sword often did just that. Ainz turned to look and saw the now bisected angel hitting the ground before seemingly evaporating as Albedo leapt up and lopped the head off of another one. Then, the mage beyond them fell in a boneless heap, Naruto standing behind him, and Beauty shook her head in confusion at the spell being broken. 5. Seizing the opportunity, Ainz turned his steed around and ran to aid his right flank upon seeing that they were struggling with their batch of angels. Chains of hell! Naruto shouted, outstretching a hand at one of the angels. The creature was stopped mid-charge before it could kill one of Ainz's men. Black chains of dark magic ensnared it, pulling the angel to the ground and pinning it down, just in time to be killed by Albedo. The leader of the Sunlight Scripture, meanwhile, was not at all pleased with what he was seeing. Focus your attention on those two, Nigan ordered. Kill them before they can cause any more trouble. No less than 24 angels each descended upon Naruto and Albedo, swarming them both with the intent to kill. Cloud of knives! Naruto shouted as a swirling mass of 1,000 blades materialized around him, slicing his would-be assailants to ribbons. Meanwhile, the ones attacking Albedo did absolutely nothing to her. Every last one of their attacks hit, but she didn't even flinch as she cut them down in droves with her bardiche. The northeastern flank is struggling, milord, Demiurge told him. Also, the man leading that group you're fighting appears to be the one in charge of the whole operation. Thanks for the heads up, Naruto replied. Then, he turned his attention to the warrior captain. Ainz. Focus on the northeast. Your men need help there, we'll finish this group off ourselves. Got it, Ainz replied, and soon after, once the angels in their way were taken care of, he and his men rode off to deal with the problem. Nodding in approval, the Yuko then approached the enemy magic casters, stopping dead in his tracks, right before the thrust of a magic spear would have gone through his head and slashing the offending angel in half with his sword. He didn't even look at it while doing that, either, which had a visible effect on several of the men he faced. Their leader was the exception. Have you come to plead for your life? Nigan asked him smugly, cackling at the redhead before him and his forces. Stopping and looking over his shoulders where Albedo was murdering everything in sight, Naruto returned his gaze to the commander. Nope, he deadpanned. Then he gave the men before him an uncaring shrug. You see, I have a budding relationship with those villagers and I don't appreciate your attempt to massacre them a second time after I went out of my way to save them from your comrades. Nigan looked surprised to hear that. So, this guy was able to discern that those men were of the slain theocracy, then? Did he manage to capture one and interrogate him? It was the only thing the priest could think of. Not sure why you're trying to start a war between the kingdom and the empire, Naruto said, and I frankly don't give a shit. But I'm a busy man and it pisses off that you'd make me work so hard and take so damn much time out of my day to keep them alive long enough to be useful. Oh? Nigan raised an eyebrow. You're acting pretty brazen for a magic caster. What do you intend to do about it? I intend to slaughter you like the pigs you are, Naruto declared, dropping his transformation and showing his true form. I will make you pay for every second you kept me tied down in blood. The sudden change in form and that look in his glowing eyes legitimately startled the forces of the theocracy. It wasn't of rage, but rather, disapproval, like what one would expect of a father scolding his child. His declaration and transformation did wonders in intimidating the men, as he'd intended, but again, their leader was unaffected, much to his credit, Naruto had to admit. Nigan clicked his tongue in annoyance. Kill him. The three mages with him started slinging their spells in unison at the apparent demon as the last of their angels, save for one, swooped in for the kill. Magic Arrow. Frost Bolt. Holy Strike. But, try as they might, none of their spells connected and the angels all similarly failed as the slippery son of a bitch danced around them like it was nothing. Almost none of them could if their lives depended on it, Naruto scoffed in amusement. This build was by far one of his greatest achievements. Despite being a mage-slash-rogue hybrid, Naruto's avatar Kurama was very much a tank of all things, partially because of an ability called Uncanny Dodge, which normally allowed him to add half of his agility to his physical defense. Improved Uncanny Dodge, meanwhile, allowed him to do the same for magical defense. Of course, Naruto was quick to notice that a kitsune with levels in Arcane Trickster gained access to Unearthly Grace, an ability that allowed him to add all of his agility to his defenses instead of just half. In summary, because of Wrath of Jigaku and his utterly broken race/class combo, he was free to put very few if any points into these stats and just increase the others as high as he could, quite obviously focusing on agility. Adding salt to the wound, evasion had a chance to make attacks of any kind, even area of effect spells, miss outright. Improved evasion increased this chance even further to a grand total of 1 in 4, which stacked with the normal chance that came with having a high agility stat. Magic Arrow, because of its effects, was the exception as it always had a 100% chance to hit, but when it did, the spell in question was absorbed by an invisible barrier, that being his greater magic nullification. In short, none of the spells these guys seemed to have had any chance of hurting him. Naruto chuckled as he inched closer and closer, reminiscing about the creative process of this broken-ass build. Upon discovering that Wrath of Jigaku was a thing, it went without saying that he immediately proceeded to abuse the absolute fuck out of it in every way he could get away with, like the power gamer he was. Even the racial bonuses he got to physical attack were not spared, having been reallocated to his agility stat, thanks to an ability called Nimble Warrior. It also helped that he'd learned a lot from examining Bellriver's build before the guy died IRL, may he rest in peace, and improved on it. That's not to say it was easy, but he managed, partially thanks to Parent Roncino's input. 6. Pushing his nostalgia aside, Naruto had to admit that he was very intrigued by these people being able to use spells from Yggdrasil. Upon joining the fray, he also immediately recognized the angels as Archangel Flames, which were also distinctly from the game in question. He eyeballed the creatures as they tried to swarm him. The beings in question were seemingly made of porcelain, with wings of golden light. Their jagged visages resembled gold and white suits of armor. There was simply no other thing they could possibly be, the appearance was just that perfect of a mock. And the big one, hovering behind the apparent leader of this group, was clearly a principality of observation, a favorite summon of the paladin whom he tended to butt heads with, back in Yggdrasil. It made him wonder if he really was the only player here. Cloud of Knives. Naruto shouted, and just like before, the angels were reduced to a fine paste by the blades that appeared, much to the shock of Nigan and his fellow mages. It's a trick. It has to be. Technically, yes, Naruto chucked. A magic trick, and for my next one, I'm gonna make you disappear. As he said that, the Yuko's grin widened. Ah, there they are, he thought. Before the fight had started, if one could even call it that, he'd created 5 copies of himself with Kage Bunshin no Jutsu, one of the perks of his ninja class. Then, he cast Perfect Unknowable on them, a spell that makes them invisible in addition to nullifying their scent and the sounds they make. After having one too many rogues in Yggdrasil hop on his back and stab him in the ears, Naruto made damn sure that every build he made since, including this one, was very good at stealth detection, so he noticed the clones immediately. 7. Of course, the mages weren't idle. Every last one of them started peppering him with spell after spell once again, trying desperately to kill him, but it was all in vain. Then, Albedo appeared before him in a blur of speed and gave them pause as one of the mages got his head blown off by his own frostbolt. "Thanks, Albedo," Naruto said, giving her a welcoming smile. "But you didn't need to do that. Those guys couldn't hope to hurt me." "Forgive me, Lord Ainz," she replied, assuming that he wanted to be referred to as such in their presence. "But, if they wish to fight you, they should at least be able to best me. These pathetic creatures are like pebbles fighting a mountain." Naruto chuckled warmly, blushing at her words. "I'd die of boredom if I had to wait that long," he told her. Nigan snarled at that, before turning to the last angel, the strongest one they had. Principality of Observation. Attack! The in question being floated towards Naruto, a massive, flanged mace appearing in its hands as it did with a golden flash, but then, several gashes suddenly opened throughout its body before the angel got anywhere near its target and slowly faded away. What the hell? Nigan shouted. "Wouldn't you like to know?" Naruto teased. Then, with a nod of his head, the shadow clones leapt into action. The dying screams of Nigan and his men were like music to his ears. The battle ended soon after. With the assassin's help and Demiurge's input, the remaining attackers didn't stand a chance. And with all of that said and done, Naruto decided to take his time heading back to the village, his Vulpine traits hidden once more. "Troublesome as that was, I learned a lot about this new world," he commented, eyeballing a crystal he'd extracted from Nigan's corpse. "I guess it was worth it in the end." It was a sealing crystal that could contain a spell of any level. More specifically, it had a 7th tier summon monster spell contained within. To think they even had items from Yggdrasil in this world. A lot of the answers I got only raised more questions, though, Naruto mused aloud. "You seem troubled, me lord," Albedo pointed out. "Just thinking is all," the Yuko told her. Then, he turned his full attention towards the succubus. "Now that everything's calmed down, though, I have a question. I couldn't help but notice that you reacted oddly to me using the name Ainz Ooal Gown. Does that bother you?" "And not at all," she replied, averting her gaze. "Come on now," Naruto chuckled warmly. "You can be honest with me, I won't be mad at you, I promise." Albedo sighed, stopping mid-stride and frowning deeply beneath her helm. If I offend you in any way, I'll gladly accept any punishment you see fit," she said hesitantly. But I don't like it one bit. I feel like those who abandoned us would object to you using that name." A frown of his own marred Naruto's face as he tucked the crystal away. She was lying, she didn't care what anyone thought, but the way she said the word abandoned made her real reason for disliking the name all too clear. "That's not true at all," he pointed out, making Albedo flinch. "You don't like that name because you resent it for some reason." He was able to tell because of 2 passive skills. The first was named Gather Information. Like Sense Motive, it was a low-level, but very useful ability available to ninja, bards, and rogues, which allowed him to read one's body language and speech patterns like a book in order to discern various things about the person, such as how they're feeling, personality traits, and other such things. Also, like Sense Motive, players were immune to it in-game, but Naruto was of course rather quick to notice that this ability worked on Gazef and the villagers, and now Albedo, which presumably meant that it would also work on the other Nazarick NPCs. He could also tell that it was somehow far more potent than it was in-game, allowing him to discern that she resented the thought of him going by the name Ainz Ooal Gown. That shouldn't have been possible, but it apparently was now. As for how he instinctively knew that these abilities were what made him so much better at reading people here than he was IR. In the another real world, Naruto hadn't the foggiest clue, but, somehow, he could just tell. Albedo struggled, trying her best to come up with a response upon being found out, but all she could do was sputter helplessly. "Or rather, you actually resent them for leaving." The succubus went utterly stiff, all but confirming it. She tried to come up with a response, but failed once more, and then this attempt was cut short when Naruto pulled her into a hug. "I'm sorry," he said. "I feel that way too, at times." But they didn't leave because they wanted to, they did it because they had to, even Tabula-san and Momonga-senpai. 8. Even with her face completely covered, the succubus visibly taken aback by how wounded her love sounded. Albedo quickly hugged him back, holding the kitsune tight. I am so sorry if I brought back any unpleasant memories," she said. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." "Albedo, I'm supposed to be the one comforting you, here," Naruto chuckled warmly, thoroughly amused. "Thank you, though. I appreciate it, and no, you didn't make me uncomfortable at all." Behind her helmet, the succubus smiled warmly at that, and the two of them just stood there for a moment, enjoying each other's embrace. Eventually, though, they did return, and when the villagers saw them, Naruto and Albedo were lavished with all manner of praise. The latter was more than a little irritated by the sight of half a dozen young maidens swooning over her love, but she said nothing and tried her best to stay composed. Lord Kurama had plans for the village, after all, and she didn't want to get in the way of that by acting out. Besides, it was to be expected. Anyone would fantasize about being with a supreme one, after all, that was only natural. As for Naruto himself, he couldn't help but be humbled by it all. The man behind the fox was not at all used to being treated in such a way. Then, his attention was pulled away from that by Gazef, looking a little banged up but in good health otherwise. Approaching him, Naruto greeted the warrior captain with a friendly smile. "Glad you made it through the day," he said. "How are you holding up?" "Well enough," Gazef replied with a tired smile. He lost more than half of his men in that fight, but if it weren't for Ainz and his wife, none of them would be around anymore and this village would no longer be standing. "I have no idea how to repay you for saving my life, and this village, twice, no less. But, feel free to look for me in the royal capital if you ever need anything." "I'll hold you up to that," Naruto chuckled good-naturedly. "I have no idea what plans you have," Gazef said. "But would you mind traveling with us back to the capital? We could use some adventurers of your skill level." "Unfortunately, I'll have to decline for now," Naruto told him. "I have some friends nearby who are probably worried sick about me." "It's too late to go out right now, though," a familiar, feminine voice told them. Henry approached the trio, eager to thank a certain redhead once again for his help. "The monsters of the great forest are far more restless at night." She turned to Naruto and continued, her cheeks starting to burn. "Why you and your wife can, stay at my place if you want." Naruto took a moment to weigh his options. It would raise some awkward questions if he just slunk off into the night, questions he'd rather not deal with the next time he came here. But, at the same time, everyone here appeared to think he was some measure of nobility. That being said, it would also be weird if he didn't play the part. "It's a kind offer," he said politely, "but I don't want to impose." "It's fine," she insisted. "After everything you've done for us, for me especially, it's the least I could do." "Well, if you insist," he replied with a warm chuckle. "Who am I to say no to such a pretty face?" Henry turned beet red at that, while Albedo was immeasurably grateful that no one could see her face right now. If looks could kill. Gazef looked rather amused by the exchange. Apparently, a certain someone was looking to make this girl a concubine. After living with the nobility for so long, though, he wasn't one to judge. While the practice was uncommon in Rieste's eyes, it wasn't unheard of. 9. Again, the warrior captain said, "Feel free to seek me out if ever you're at the capital." "Will do," the Yuko chirped, before turning to his companion. "Let's go, Albedo." "As you wish," the succubus muttered hesitantly. It took every ounce of self-control she had for her not to growl those words. The next day, however, back in the throne room of Nazarick, Albedo was as happy as a clam, despite her initial feelings about staying the night with that insignificant worm who was clearly trying to seduce her love. There was a spring in the succubus step after she got to actually sleep with Lord Kurama. Granted, all they did was cuddle, but still. Albedo giggled lewdly, leering at her love and squirming about like a horny schoolgirl. Naruto couldn't help but blush at that. Truth be told, he came so close to fucking her bow-legged when spending the night at Ainz. And the man behind the fox knew damn well that if he had given in to said temptation, 2 more girls would have been deflowered that night. Taking a deep, calming breath and doing his best to ignore the raging boner, Naruto returned to the book he'd been flipping through. The ancient, mystical-looking tome in question was the Encyclopedia of Yggdrasil, previously owned by Parent Roncino before he and his sister left the game. Given how close he and that unapologetic, self-proclaimed degenerate were, it shouldn't have come as a surprise that Parent Roncino had entrusted him with deleting the more questionable info if Naruto ever quit the game himself. But it did. Naruto was so flattered by how much trust that man had shown. They really were the best of friends. Realizing that he'd gotten distracted again, Naruto pushed those thoughts aside for another time and returned his attention to the encyclopedia once more. Continuing to flip through the pages, he came to the Oni section, and it was therein that he found the cause of his irritation. Oni, not to be confused with the more specific, ogre-like creatures commonly associated with this term, the word Oni in Yggdrasil is in reference to the original, more nebulous meaning, making them the poster child of heteromorphs. Basically, to be an Oni is to be the living antithesis of humanity itself, to be driven by the desire to rape, pillage, murder, conquer, fuck your mother, and or consume human flesh, possibly among other things, in no particular order. All things considered, they are one of the most criminally underused races for ERP, especially because their reservations are on par with what you'd expect from a succubus. Game-wise, this anti-humanism is why a karma rating of -300 or lower is required to take on levels in this racial class. It's also why your karma rating drops to -500 when gain a level in this class and can never go any higher. The females of this race, known as Kijo, tend to be physically weaker, but generally sport a stronger affinity for demonic magic, which is why their level cap in demonic sorcerer is 10 instead of 5. 10. On a side note, the ladies of this race also have some wonderful femdom potential, and the horns of their more ogre-like versions tend to make for lovely handlebars. That whole entry was Parent Roncino at his finest. Naruto stopped halfway, though, since it only contained more impertinent information from there, such as how to unlock the class, recommended combinations, and which ERP fantasies would be best suited for them. He couldn't help but smile at the shoutouts in there, though. It probably shouldn't have come as a surprise, given that he was single-handedly responsible for most of the information in this entry being discovered, but it did, and it was very flattering. Explains a lot, Naruto muttered, his smile fading as he mulled over the information. Though his karma rating was as low as it could go, he figured that it wasn't the only cause. Being evil, in and of itself, didn't necessarily equal the willingness, let alone the desire, to rape a 10-year-old girl and her wounded sister in the woods, after all. Then again, his character was literally as evil as could be, so it's entirely possible that his levels in the Oni class only added fuel to the fire. He'd have to check with his daughters about that later on. Regardless, it was annoying. 11. Milord? Albedo asked, looking concerned. You seem displeased. Is something wrong? Just mildly irritated, Naruto admitted. The whole time I was in that village, I was fighting the temptation to rape and pillage. He let out a tired sigh. Needless to say, giving in would have made my goals a lot harder than they needed to be, but it was especially hard to resist having my way with some of those girls. Just as Albedo was about to say something, Shaltir spoke up, making her presence known while she entered the throne room. If it's that much of an issue, the vampire said, I'd gladly serve as your outlet. I may not look like it, but I'm quite the masochist, so you don't have to worry about being a little rough. Albedo snarled at her, while Naruto gave Shaltir a sheepish chuckle. It's a kind offer, he replied awkwardly. He really meant it, though. But, well, the people of Nazarick are all precious to me, the Yuko continued. Everyone here, yourself included, is the closest thing to a family I have left, so I'd feel really guilty for treating you like that. Unfortunately, his words only left Shaltir more willing to let him, while Albedo swooned at how pure and sincere he was being. Naruto cleared his throat, practically reading them both like the book in his lap. Thanks for the offer, though, he said, focusing on the vampire once more. That aside, I take it you're here to issue your report? I am, Shaltir replied, giving her lord a curtsy. In total, we managed to snatch up 3 survivors, one of whom was of high rank. They are awaiting interrogation in the frozen prison. Good, Naruto chirped. In hindsight, I'm a little irritated with myself for killing their leader, since he would have been a valuable target. It's nice that we at least grabbed someone of high rank, though. I trust that neuronist will be more careful this time? Oh, she most definitely will, Shaltir assured. She was rather apologetic for overestimating that first one's durability, in fact. Good to know, Naruto said with a grin. I don't mind mistakes too much, as long as you learn from them. Depends on how big they are, of course, but that was a fairly small one on her part. Both Shaltir and Albedo smiled at that. Anything else? Naruto asked, looking at both women. The shadow demons have reported nothing amiss lately, Albedo chimed in. There was an ogre they dealt with a while back, but that was about it. It didn't seem to be heading for Karn per se, but Lord Kurama had plans for said village, so they didn't take any chances. Also, she continued, that gear those men were wearing had no major enchantments. We've put it all in the low-tier section of Nazarick's treasury until further notice. I'll check it out later, Naruto said with a nod of approval. I want to learn as much about this world as possible. Is there anything we should do about this Gazef and his men? Shaltir asked, just to be sure. Leave them be for now, the Yuko told her. We don't want to cause any trouble if we can avoid it. Too risky if we don't know what we're getting into. As you wish, both women replied in unison. With that out of the way, though, Naruto added, you two, Mare, and Cositus, all found yourselves working for much longer than I was intending. It's fine, me lord, Shaltir told him with a smile. We are all delighted to serve you, Albedo chimed in. Naruto gave them a warm, but sheepish chuckle at that. Still, though, I feel the need to reward the 4 of you for your dedication. Looking down thoughtfully at the book he was holding, he slammed it shut and held it out towards Shaltir. Might as well start with you, he said. This was owned by Paran Roncino. He made me promise to erase around half of its contents before giving it to someone else, but I'm sure he'd gladly make an exception with you. The vampire's expression was one of utter shock. That felt like far too much for what little she did. She struggled to say something, anything, but the poor thing was just so overwhelmed. Go on, he said, chuckling warmly. I insist. Shaltir gingerly grasped the book. She felt her eyes start to burn, but pushed back the tears. Then, she hugged it close, as if it were her most prized possession. Be a dear and fetch Mare and Cositus while I give Albedo her reward, he said, causing the succubus in question to perk up. The vampire, meanwhile, nodded, turned on her heel, and ran the hell out of there before she could do something improper. I like seeing girls get all flustered way more than I should, Naruto commented, eliciting a giggle from Albedo. While he couldn't blame his classes in Oni for that trait, the redhead couldn't help but wonder if they enhanced it. 12. Questions for later. Clearing his throat, Naruto then turned his attention to Albedo. Once I'm done here, he said, I want you to summon the remaining floor guardians, minus Gargantua. Let him sleep. Of course, me lord, she replied with a bow. Nodding, he smiled at the succubus. Now, as for your reward. That's it for this reading. Hit like and subscribe for a free ticket past going to the different worlds of anime fanfiction. Looking forward to having you on board again.